Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dreams of Drift. Here on this channel, I shares UFO sightings, alien encounters, and relaxing space stories off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. Imagine the summer of 1947. The war has been over for 2 years, yet the world still feels raw. Soldiers have come home to new houses with picture windows and shiny chrome kitchens. But at night they sit on porches, smoking, listening to the crickets, looking up at a sky that suddenly feels different. Something is moving up there, silent lights that stop, start, and vanish faster than any airplane ever could. People talk in low voices about flying saucers, a phrase born from a single newspaper headline that somehow stuck. By 1952, those whispers have grown into a steady hum across the entire country. In living rooms lit by the soft glow of black and white televisions, families watch the news and hear pilots, trained men, not prone to fantasy, describe silver discs pacing their jets. Radar operators in lonely towers along the coasts rub tired eyes as blips appear, accelerate impossibly, then disappear. Newspapers run banner headlines one day and apologetic retractions the next. Children trade stories at school. Ministers mention strange signs from the pulpit on Sunday mornings. Something unexplained is sharing the sky with the familiar stars, and no one quite knows what to do about it. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, corridors that once echoed with wartime urgency now carry quieter, more anxious footsteps. Young officers carry manila folders stamped secret to rooms where the Venetian blinds stay half-closed even during the day. Coffee grows cold while captains and majors argue over grainy photographs and handwritten sighting reports. The earlier investigations, Project Sign in 1948, then the more skeptical Project Grudge, had come and gone, leaving behind filing cabinets stuffed with questions and very few answers. Each month the reports multiplied. Farmers in the Midwest, housewives hanging laundry, commercial pilots over the Great Lakes, ordinary people, credible people, are seeing things that refuse to fit any known category. By early 1952, the pressure becomes impossible to ignore. Newspapers demand explanations. Senators receive sacks of constituent letters. The CIA quietly warns that Soviet psychological warfare could be exploiting the confusion. And so, in March of that year, in a simple press release that most Americans barely noticed, the United States Air Force announces something new: Project Blue Book. A calm, official name meant to sound orderly and reassuring. From this moment forward, every report of an unidentified flying object will be funneled to a small team led by Captain Edward Ruppelt, a thoughtful officer who actually wants to know what is happening upstairs. The first case files are already waiting on the desks, hundreds of them, then thousands. Some will be meteors, balloons, or mirages wearing clever disguises. Others will resist every reasonable label, no matter how many experts study them. In dimly lit offices late at night, typewriters clack softly while analysts wonder, without ever saying it aloud, whether we have been alone up there after all. Project Blue Book has opened its doors. The skies, vast and patient, keep their secrets a little longer. But what they were about to discover, quietly, carefully, one folder at a time, would challenge everything they thought they knew about our skies, and perhaps about ourselves. In a small office on the second floor of Wright-Patterson's Building 263, a single desk lamp burning long after the rest of the base had gone quiet, sat a slender, bespectacled man in his late 20s named Edward J. Ruppelt. To the generals, he was simply Captain Ruppelt, but to the handful of sergeants and civilian analysts who worked under him, he was just the skipper, the one who actually read every report instead of skimming the summaries. He had a calm voice, the kind that could lower the temperature in a room, and a habit of leaning back in his chair, fingers laced behind his head, staring at the ceiling whenever a case refused to make sense. Ruppelt had not asked for the job. He had been a decorated B-29 bombardier in the Pacific, then an intelligence officer who spent the late 1940s debriefing pilots about Soviet aircraft capabilities. He understood radar, aerodynamics, and human perception under stress. When the call came in early 1952 asking him to take over the Air Force's floundering UFO desk, he accepted mostly because someone had to bring order to the chaos. He arrived to find cardboard boxes overflowing with sighting reports, some written in pencil on the backs of grocery bags, others typed on official military stationery. The sheer volume was staggering. By summer, the mail sacks would arrive twice a day. Under Ruppelt's direction, Project Blue Book finally began to look like a real investigation instead of a public relations sideshow. He insisted on standard report forms, astronomical charts taped to every wall, and a huge map of the United States studded with colored pins. Red for radar cases, blue for pilot sightings, yellow for multiple witnesses, white for the ones that kept him awake. He brought in consultants from Ohio State's Astronomy Department, meteorologists from the Weather Bureau, even a psychologist who studied how fear and expectation could twist what the eye believed it saw. Late at night, you could hear the soft clack of IBM punch card machines in the basement, sorting data the way astronomers sorted stars. Yet for all the new rigor, the human side never disappeared. Ruppelt kept a battered coffee pot going at all hours and listened, really listened, while frightened civilians told him about lights that hovered over their farms and then shot straight up until they shrank to pinpricks. He answered letters himself when he could, signing them in neat, slanted handwriting. "We are investigating your case with great interest." Sergeants remember him pacing the hallway at 2 a.m., a cigarette glowing, murmuring, "If it's a hallucination, it's the best coordinated hallucination in history." He never mocked a witness, never rolled his eyes. He believed that if something truly unexplained was happening, the truth would only reveal itself through patience and respect. By the time Ruppelt left the project in 1953, slightly worn, hair already thinning, his team had processed 12,618 reported sightings. Most would eventually wear a rational label: aircraft, balloons, Venus glinting through temperature inversions. A quiet minority, however, refused to be tamed. Little did Ruppelt know that 10 of these cases, scattered across those thousands of folders, would remain unexplained, defying every rational explanation his team could devise, and would still be debated, whispered about, and wondered over 7 decades later, long after the last Blue Book file was sealed and archived. When a report landed on the Blue Book desk, it passed through a quiet, almost gentle ritual. First, a clerk typed it onto the standard form. Then it traveled from tray to tray, gathering polite pencil notes. Check with Weather Bureau, request radar tapes, interview witness again. The goal was never to prove something extraordinary. The goal was simply to discover whether anything ordinary could account for what people had seen. Only when every day, ordinary things turned out to be surprisingly good at mimicking the impossible. Most cases surrendered quickly. A brilliant light hovering low over a highway might become a bright planet caught in temperature inversion, its light refracted and trembling like a living thing. A formation of glowing objects racing across the night sky could be high-altitude balloons reflecting sunset long after the ground had gone dark. Lenticular clouds, advertising planes, meteors breaking apart in silent fire. Each explanation arrived with photographs, charts, and calm, reasonable sentences. By the end, roughly 94% of the 12,618 cases wore a comfortable, earthly label. Reading those files today feels almost soothing, like watching puzzle pieces click neatly into place. Yet 701 cases refused to cooperate. After every astronomer had weighed in, every radar expert had studied the tapes, every psychologist had considered perception and stress, these reports simply stopped. The folders were marked unidentified, or, even more carefully, insufficient information for positive identification, but everyone in the office understood the quiet difference. Insufficient information meant maybe someday an answer would appear. Unidentified meant the answer had been searched for exhaustively and had not been found. Captain Ruppelt's team never liked the word unexplained. It sounded too final, too dramatic. They preferred to say a case lacked conventional explanation at this time, as if the universe were merely holding its breath. Still, late at night when the building was empty, even the most level-headed analysts would pull one of those stubborn folders back out, spread the statements across the desk, and read them again by lamplight, listening to the soft hum of the ventilation system and the distant bark of a military dog outside. The statements always sounded so reasonable. A commercial pilot with 20 years in the air, 2 police officers in separate squad cars, an entire control tower staff watching the same object on both ground and airborne radar. No hysteria, no contradiction, just calm voices describing something that climbed faster than any rocket, turned at angles no aircraft could survive, and left without a sound. Project Blue Book never claimed to have all the answers. Its final report, released years after the doors closed, was almost humble in tone. Most sightings have prosaic causes. A small percentage do not, and those few deserve continued, careful study. That restraint is part of what makes the remaining cases feel so peaceful yet persistent, like distant lighthouse beams sweeping slowly across calm water. Tonight, we're diving into 10 of those cases, 10 quiet, courteous mysteries that even the most skeptical investigators couldn't explain away. 10 stories that still drift through the archives, waiting, patient as starlight. Take a slow breath and let the day loosen its grip. Find your favorite blanket, lower the lights until the room glows only from the screen, and allow the soft hum of the night to settle around you. This is your time. No rush, no demands, just quiet stories from a time when the sky itself seemed to be whispering secrets. Over the next few hours, we'll drift together through 10 of the most compelling cases Project Blue Book ever faced. Each one is short enough to feel like a gentle chapter, yet detailed enough to carry you away. You'll hear from airline crews who watched glowing discs dance around their planes, from entire towns that looked up at once and saw the same silent light, from radar operators whose screens lit up with objects that broke every rule of physics. Some stories unfold over lonely highways at 3 a.m., others above bustling cities in broad daylight. All of them carry that same calm, unhurried wonder. We'll begin in 1948 with a young pilot who never came home after chasing a light he couldn't identify. Then we'll glide forward through the years. A photographer in Oregon who captured something impossible on film. 2 Navy jets over the Atlantic that vanished while pursuing an unknown. A wave of sightings above Washington, D.C. that made front-page news for weeks. We'll linger over cases where radar and human eyes agreed, where children and generals saw exactly the same thing, where physical traces were left on the ground long after the lights faded. There's no loud music, no jump scares, no breathless shouting, just the steady rhythm of a voice inviting you deeper into the mystery. If your eyes grow heavy, that's perfectly all right. Let the stories continue like distant waves on a nighttime beach. If you stay awake until the end, you'll carry 10 quiet, stubborn questions with you into your dreams. From military pilots to ordinary citizens, from radar confirmations to unexplainable photographs, these cases changed everything. Not with noise or panic, but with the soft persistence, the way starlight changes the darkness if you simply keep looking. So adjust your pillow, feel the weight of the day slip away, and let these mysteries wash over you like cool air through an open summer window. The files are open. The night is deep and patient. And somewhere above us, the same sky that puzzled captains and farmers alike is waiting, unchanged, still holding its secrets close. We begin in just a moment. Whenever you're ready, close your eyes, or keep them softly open, and come with me. As the final Blue Book files were boxed away in the mid-1960s, the project left behind more than dusty folders in a Dayton warehouse. It etched itself into the American imagination like a half-remembered dream, one that lingers in the quiet hours before sleep. Newspapers that once splashed saucer headlines across front pages now ran thoughtful editorials, pondering whether the skies held visitors or simply mirrors of our own fears. In Hollywood, the project's restraint birthed a golden age of wonder. Steven Spielberg's twinkling lights in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the shadowy government agents in The X-Files, even the earnest seekers in Steven Soderbergh's Contact. UFOs stopped being mere tabloid fodder and became a canvas for our deepest questions about solitude in the cosmos, the limits of what we can know, and the fragile line between the seen and the unseen. But the true ripple reached further, into the way ordinary evenings unfolded. Drive-in theaters filled with families sharing popcorn under starlit screens, whispering about lights that might not be planes. Campfire circles grew hushed as teenagers traded tales of Mantell or the Lubbock Lights, blending awe with the comfort of shared uncertainty. Project Blue Book didn't solve the mystery. It amplified it, turning private glances at the night sky into a collective vigil. It taught us to listen, not just to radar pings or witness sketches, but to the soft pull of curiosity that draws us upward, generation after generation. Today, in boardrooms and bedrooms alike, that vigil continues under a new name, Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, or UAP. The Pentagon, once so guarded, now speaks openly through its all-domain Anomaly Resolution Office, established in 2022 to sift through reports with the same measured care Ruppelt once applied. In March 2024, they released a sweeping historical review, poring over decades of sightings and finding no evidence of extraterrestrial craft, but also no tidy closure for hundreds of stubborn cases. By November 2024, Congress held hearings where pilots and physicists testified to lights that outpaced jets and submerged without ripples, urging greater transparency. And as we sit here in late 2025, ARO's caseload swells. Over 1,600 reports tallied by October, with 757 new ones flooding in from May 2023 to June 2024 alone. 485 fresh incidents, plus older echoes from 2021 and 2022. 21 of those remain particularly interesting, unresolved anomalies that hover in the data like fireflies refusing to fade. These disclosures aren't fireworks. They're steady beacons, much like Blue Book's quiet files. Lawmakers push for declassified archives at the National Archives, testing tools like the Gremlin system to track UAP in real time. Pilots file reports without fear of ridicule, and apps on our phones now log civilian sightings alongside weather apps. It's a bridge from those post-war nights to our own. Suburbs have become smart homes, but the glance skyward endures, now laced with drone cams and satellite feeds. Why does it matter? This thread from 1952 to tomorrow. Because in a world of instant answers, these stories remind us that some truths unfold slowly, like mist rising from a calm lake. They invite us to wonder without demanding belief, to question without chasing shadows. The questions asked in the 1950s and 60s are the same questions we're still asking today, and the answers remain just as elusive, just as beautifully out of reach. The summer of 1952 had settled over Washington like a warm, heavy quilt. By day, the city shimmered. Tourists in seersucker suits strolled the National Mall. Children chased fireflies along the reflecting pool, and the marble monuments glowed softly in the long evenings. But when the sun finally slipped behind the Potomac, the air stayed thick and still, the kind of humidity that made shirt collars cling and porch conversations stretch lazily into the night. On Friday, July 18th, most of the capital's 9-to-5 workers had already left for the weekend. The streets around the White House were quiet, the windows of office typewriters replaced by the distant drone of cicadas. Inside the control tower at Washington National Airport, today's Reagan National, the mood was equally drowsy. The long glass windows looked out over a dark runway lit only by soft amber lights. Coffee had been brewed hours earlier and now tasted faintly of tin. Senior Controller Edward Nugent leaned back in his chair, feet propped on a pulled-out drawer, listening to the low, rhythmic sweep of the radar scope. Around him, the night shift moved in comfortable slow motion. Harry Barnes, the chief radar operator, a calm, pipe-smoking man in his 40s. Controllers Jim Ritchie and Jim Copeland trading quiet jokes. A couple of younger men monitoring approach frequencies that carried little more than the occasional sleepy good night from departing prop liners. The big ASR-1 radar screen glowed sea green in the dim room, its long arms sweeping in steady circles, painting ghostly returns of familiar landmarks. The Pentagon, Andrews Air Force Base, the bends of the river. Everything was exactly where it belonged. At 11:40 p.m. the arms swept again, and 7 sharp, bright blips appeared in a loose cluster south of the field, near Andrews. They weren't scheduled aircraft. They weren't drifting weather echoes. They simply materialized, crisp and solid, moving at speeds the controllers had never seen on their screens. Barnes leaned closer, the pipe forgotten in his hand. The blips were traveling over 100 miles an hour, then abruptly slowed, reversed direction, and accelerated again. Smooth, impossible maneuvers that made the room's quiet hum suddenly felt louder, the way silence grows heavy just before a storm. Someone reached for the direct phone line to the Andrews Tower 20 miles away. Within minutes, Andrews confirmed. Their own radar was painting the same targets, now streaking across restricted airspace directly above the Capitol. In the tower, the joking stopped. Nugent's feet came off the drawer. Controllers crowded around the scope, watching the lights perform a silent ballet, climbing vertically, diving, hovering motionless for minutes before shooting away at speeds that should have torn any known aircraft apart. Outside the wide windows, the night looked perfectly ordinary. Stars, a thin crescent moon, the distant red beacon on the Washington Monument blinking its patient rhythm. Yet inside the radar room, the screens told a different story. Phones began to ring softly across the network. Andrews, the Air Defense Command, even a few commercial pilots still aloft who now reported seeing glowing white or orange lights pacing them below. No one raised their voice. The men spoke in the measured tones of professionals who suddenly realized the rulebook no longer applies. What began as a routine night shift, humid and slow, was about to become one of the most documented UFO events in history, one that would spill across 2 consecutive weekends, draw fighter jets into the sky, and leave even the most skeptical officials searching for words they could not quite find. By 1 o'clock in the morning, the picture had grown impossible to dismiss. 3 separate radar installations, Washington National CAA radar, Andrews Air Force Base's air defense radar, and a second Andrews long-range search set, were all painting the same 7 targets. Each scope operated on different frequencies, used different antennas, and was tended by different crews, yet the objects appeared identically, hard, bright returns that behaved like solid metal craft. When the national controller turned down the gain to eliminate possible angels, ghost echoes from temperature inversions, the targets stayed strong. When Andrews switched to a tighter beam, the returns sharpened even more. At 1:30 a.m., Capital Airlines Flight 807, inbound from Pittsburgh, checked in with Washington approach. Pilot Casey Pierman, a 30-year veteran who had flown everything from DC-3s to the newest constellations, was handed off to Senior Controller Harry Barnes. In the calm, almost bored tone pilots use late at night, Barnes asked if Pierman saw anything unusual. There was a pause. Then Pierman's voice returned, softer now. I've got 6 bright white lights ahead of me, moving fast. They just dimmed and sped up. Now 4 of them are circling me. Barnes watched the scope, for blips had peeled off the main group and were orbiting the airliner at a steady 3-mile radius, climbing and descending in perfect formation. Pierman never varied from his assigned altitude or heading. He simply flew straight while the lights danced around him like silent escorts. On the ground, dozens of citizens began calling newspapers and police stations. A Pan-American crew waiting to depart saw orange lights, like glowing coals, racing over the terminal. An off-duty airline mechanic standing in the parking lot counted 7 objects in a loose V formation that suddenly snapped into a perfect circle, hovered, then shot upward until they vanished. At Andrews, 2 air traffic controllers stepped outside the tower cab and watched with binoculars as a steady orange light hung motionless above the base, brightened, dimmed, then streaked west, and returned minutes later to the same spot. The objects moved in ways number 1952 aircraft could dream of. One target accelerated from a hover to over 7,000 miles per hour in seconds. Radar operators actually timed it, then stopped dead and reversed course. Another pair performed perfect right-angle turns at speeds that would have produced 40 Gs of force, enough to shred any known airframe. Yet the returns remained crisp, never smearing or breaking up the way a flock of birds or a weather front would. Throughout the night, the same pattern repeated. Radar tracks, visual sightings, radar tracks again, all matching in location, timing, and behavior. No single source could be mistaken. No single witness could be hallucinating. Commercial pilots, military radar technicians, ground observers, and civilian controllers, people trained to trust their instruments and their eyes, were all describing the same impossible performance. These weren't just blips on a screen. Experienced pilots were watching these objects with their own eyes, feeling the calm night air through open cockpit windows, while lights brighter than any star performed maneuvers that belonged to a future none of them could yet imagine. By 3 in the morning, the radar rooms felt like quiet libraries suddenly aware they were being watched. Phones no longer rang. They simply stayed off the hook, lines open between National, Andrews, and the Air Defense Command post in Delaware. At 3:15 a.m., the order finally came down. Scramble the night fighters. 2 Lockheed F-94 Starfires lifted off from Newcastle County Airport near Wilmington, their afterburners glowing soft orange against the humid dark. The pilots, Major Dewey Fournette and Lieutenant William Patterson, were already airborne when they received their vector. Unknown traffic over the capital. Proceed direct Andrews. Angels unknown. Neither man laughed at the briefing. Both had flown combat in Korea and knew the calm voice on the radio meant business. As the jets streaked south at 600 knots, controllers fed them constant updates. Targets now bearing 240 from your position, range 30 miles, altitude varying. Then, almost politely, the blips began to move away from the approaching fighters. When the F-94s closed to 15 miles, the targets accelerated smoothly to the east, staying just outside radar lock-on range. When the jets turned to pursue, the objects slowed again, as if waiting. Lieutenant Patterson was the first to see them, for steady white lights in a loose diamond formation, brighter than landing lights. No strobe, no navigation glow. He called them out quietly, the way a hunter speaks when the deer finally steps into the clearing. The lights held position for several seconds, then rose vertically at an easy, impossible speed. Patterson pushed his throttles forward. The F-94 shuddered as it climbed. The lights simply dimmed, accelerated, and vanished upward. His radar painted nothing but empty sky. Minutes later, Major Fournette reported a single orange glow hovering near the White House prohibited zone. He turned toward it, armed his guns, and requested permission to engage if necessary. The glow brightened once, almost like an acknowledgement, then streaked south over the Potomac so fast the jet's radar never acquired it. By the time Fournette reversed course, the object had reappeared behind him, now pacing his tail at a comfortable distance. He banked hard left. The light mirrored the turn for turn, never closer, never farther, as though attached by an invisible thread. Fuel began to run low. Controllers gently recalled the jets. The moment the F-94s turned north, every remaining target on the scopes blossomed outward like petals opening, scattering across Maryland and Virginia. When a second pair of fighters launched at dawn, the sky was clear, the radar screens quiet, the objects simply gone. Back in the debriefing room at Andrews, the pilots sat with coffee cooling in paper cups, speaking softly. Patterson kept repeating the same phrase. They knew we were coming. Every time. Fournette, usually the calmest voice in any cockpit, just stared at the floor and nodded. Neither man sounded frightened. They sounded thoughtful, the way you sound when you realize the rules you trained under might not apply anymore. The objects seemed to know when the jets were coming, playing a game that suggested intelligence beyond human comprehension, an effortless, almost courteous dance that left the fastest interceptors in the Air Force looking slow and earthbound. A week passed, quiet and sticky. The newspapers had moved on to Korean truce talks and a heat wave in Kansas. Controllers at National Airport told themselves the strange weekend had been a fluke, maybe an inversion layer, maybe tired eyes. Then, on Saturday night, July 26th, the radar scopes lit up again, almost politely, as if knocking before entering. This time the targets arrived in greater numbers, 12 to 15 at once, moving with the same effortless grace. They drifted in over the Virginia suburbs, hovered above the Pentagon for long minutes, then fanned out across the river like bright embers carried on an invisible wind. Andrews and National painted them simultaneously. A CAA radar technician at Quantico confirmed the same, returns 30 miles south. The objects performed slow figure eights over the White House and Capitol, their altitude shifting from 1,000 to 8,000 feet without any visible climb or descent. Commercial pilots again became unwilling guests. Capital Airlines Flight 610 reported a ring of 6 lights that rose to meet the airliner, flew parallel for several minutes, then peeled away in perfect sequence. An Eastern Airlines crew watched a single amber globe pace them from Washington to Richmond before turning back toward the Capitol as though it had somewhere else to be. On the ground, hundreds of citizens flooded police lines and radio stations. One woman in Arlington stood on her porch with her children and counted the lights aloud until her voice grew hoarse. A cab driver parked near the Lincoln Memorial simply left his meter running while he stared upward. Fare forgotten. By midnight, the story was breaking nationwide. Teletype machines clattered in newsrooms from Miami to Seattle. The Associated Press moved a bulletin at 12:47 a.m. Unidentified objects again over Washington. Families who had been half asleep in front of television sets now stepped onto lawns and balconies, scanning the warm darkness. In small towns across Maryland and Virginia, porch lights flicked on as neighbors called to one another. For the first time since the war, the entire eastern seaboard seemed to pause and look up together. At Andrews, the tower loudspeaker carried a calm, almost sleepy exchange between a controller and a pilot. Traffic 12 o'clock, 5 miles, no altitude readout. I've got him visual, steady blue-white light, no NAV lights, no strobe. Roger. He just climbed through 10,000 feet like the elevator in the Empire State Building. A soft chuckle, then silence. Jets scrambled again, this time earlier and in greater numbers. They found the same cat-and-mouse game. Only now the objects appeared to linger longer, almost teasing, vanishing the moment a fighter closed within 10 miles, reappearing the instant the jet turned away. One pilot reported a cluster of lights that suddenly merged into a single intense glow, bright enough to cast shadows inside his cockpit, before winking out. By dawn Sunday, the radar screens were empty once more, the sky rinsed pale pink. But the nation had changed overnight. Drugstore counters sold out of binoculars. Amateur radio operators kept all-night vigils. And in the Pentagon's dimly lit corridors, senior officers gathered around coffee urns, speaking in low, careful voices. This time, the entire nation was paying attention, and the Air Force could no longer remain silent. On the afternoon of July 29, 1952, the Pentagon room 3 times 10 to the power of -869 felt more like a courtroom than a briefing hall. More than 100 reporters crowded the long tables, cigarettes glowing in the dim light, flashbulbs popping like summer lightning. It was the largest press conference the Defense Department had held since the end of World War II. Major General John A. Samford, Air Force Director of Intelligence, stepped to the podium in a crisp summer uniform, flanked by generals and scientists. His voice was calm, almost grandfatherly. For nearly 90 minutes, he spoke of weather, of radar quirks, of honest mistakes. The official explanation, delivered with quiet certainty, rested on a single phrase: temperature inversion. Warm air, he said, had layered itself above cooler air near the ground, bending radar beams the way a prism bends light. Ordinary aircraft, stars, even city lights could be reflected downward and appear as solid, moving targets miles from their true position. Ground clutter could bounce and dance across the scopes. The visual sightings? Merely bright celestial bodies or meteors shimmering through the same mirage-like air. No evidence, Samford concluded, of any threat to national security. No evidence of anything extraordinary at all. Reporters scribbled furiously. A few nodded. Most looked skeptical. When questions came, they were polite but pointed. Could an inversion make objects perform right-angle turns at 7,000 miles per hour? Could it orbit an airliner in perfect formation? Could it vanish the moment interceptors arrived and return the moment they left? Samford smiled thinly, repeated the phrase, optical and radar anomalies, and promised further study, and thanked everyone for coming. Outside in the corridor, Captain Edward Ruppelt, Blue Book's chief, stood quietly against the wall, hands in pockets. He had spent the previous week interviewing the same controllers and pilots. He knew the temperature inversion that night had been mild, barely enough to cause minor ducting, nowhere near strong enough to produce the effects witnessed. Yet he said nothing. Orders were orders. The next day, newspapers carried the Air Force line on page 1. Saucers explained. But in the smaller columns, in letters to the editor, in quiet conversations on evening porches, people kept asking the same gentle questions. If it was only weather, why did the objects react to the jets? Why did experienced radar men who lived by their scopes, refuse to accept the explanation? Why did the lights return the following weekend, long after the inversion had dissipated? The press conference had closed the official discussion. It had not closed the wonder. But did a temperature inversion really explain everything? Many witnesses didn't think so, and 73 years later, neither do most who have studied the raw radar tapes, the pilot logs, and the calm, unexcited voices preserved in those yellowing Blue Book files. Levelland, Texas, in early November 1957, was the kind of place where silence had weight. The town itself was just a handful of low brick buildings and cotton gins clustered around a blinking red traffic light, but the land around it stretched away forever, flat, treeless, and honest. At night the sky felt close enough to touch, a black bowl salted with stars so bright they cast faint shadows on the road. The wind moved steadily across the cotton stubble, carrying the cool, clean smell of turned earth and distant rain. On the evening of Saturday, November 2nd, the temperature hovered in the upper 40s. Most folks had already turned off their porch lights and settled in with the radio playing low. Out on Highway 116, about 6 miles west of town, Pedro Saucedo and his friend Joe Salas rode in an old pickup, windows down, the engine knocking softly as they rolled along at an easy 35. Pedro, a 30-year-old farmhand who spoke mostly Spanish and laughed easily, was telling Joe about the football game he'd listened to earlier. The road was empty. The only light came from their headlights and the hard white glow of the Milky Way overhead. Then the sky changed. About a mile ahead, a blue-green glow rose above the horizon. Not a flare, not car lights, not the moonrise. It brightened quickly, silently, until it became a long, cigar-shaped brilliance streaked with yellow and orange. Pedro eased off the gas. The object drifted toward them, low and fast, covering the mile in seconds. As it neared, the pickup's headlights dimmed. The engine coughed once, twice, then died completely. The radio went dead. The truck rolled to a stop in the middle of the empty highway. The thing passed directly overhead, maybe 200 feet up, close enough that both men felt a wave of heat and heard a soft rushing sound, like wind through tall grass, only louder. It was oval, perhaps 200 feet long, glowing with a shifting turquoise light that pulsed gently. Flames or sparks trailed from the rear, yet there was no smoke, no smell of fuel. Pedro would later say it felt like staring into a welder's torch wrapped in cool silk, beautiful and terrifying at once. The object shot forward, climbed at an impossible angle, and vanished toward the north in the space of a heartbeat. As soon as it disappeared, the pickup's engine turned over on its own, the headlights flared back to life, and the radio crackled with a distant country station. Pedro sat frozen, hands still gripping the wheel. Joe stared at him, mouth open. Neither man spoke for a long minute. Then Pedro pressed the accelerator and drove straight to the police station in Levelland, tires humming on the quiet asphalt, the night suddenly feeling much larger than before. What Pedro saw next would trigger one of the most credible mass sighting events in UFO history, an event that would bring 9 separate witnesses, stalled cars, frightened families, and a sheriff who would never quite look at the night sky the same way again. Pedro Saucedo's old pickup had never been fussy. It started in rain, in dust storms, even after sitting weeks under the Texas sun. Yet when that glowing torpedo-shaped light passed overhead, the engine simply quit, as though someone had turned a key it didn't have. The headlights faded to dull orange threads, the ammeter needle dropped to 0, and the cab filled with an odd, heavy silence. No ticking, no cooling metal, nothing. Then, just as suddenly, when the light vanished northward, the engine coughed once and caught again, headlights blazing back to full strength. Pedro would tell Sheriff Clem later, in his careful, Spanish-tinged English. It felt like the truck held its breath until the thing left. He was not alone. At 10:50 p.m., only minutes after Pedro's encounter, Jim Wheeler was driving north of Levelland on Highway 116 when a brilliant white light dropped out of the sky and settled on the road ahead. His 1956 Ford stalled dead at 60 miles an hour. Lights out, radio silent. Wheeler coasted to the shoulder, heart hammering. The object, an egg-shaped glow about 200 feet long, neon white with a greenish tint, rose slowly until it hovered just above the power lines, pulsing softly. 30 seconds later it shot upward and disappeared. Wheeler turned the key. The engine started instantly, as if nothing had happened. By 11:15 p.m. the pattern was repeating itself like a slow heartbeat across the flat cotton fields. Newell Wright, a college student, was driving home near Smyre when his engine, lights, and radio died all at once. He got out and lifted the hood, nothing obviously wrong. A large, glowing oval sat on the road 200 yards ahead, bathing the asphalt in turquoise light. Wright stood there, coat collar turned up against the chill, watching it throb gently for several minutes before it rose straight up and winked out. The moment it vanished, his car started without the key being turned. At 11:45 p.m. Frank Williams, a truck driver hauling grain, met the same silent visitor near Witherill. Engine dead, lights gone, brakes barely working. The object hovered close enough that he could see faint flame-like flickers along its underside. Then it climbed and was gone. His truck roared back to life. One after another, the calls trickled into the Levelland Sheriff's office. A man near Sun City, whose wife watched the light from the porch while his sedan refused to start. Two soldiers from Reese Air Force Base, whose Jeep stalled on a lonely farm-to-market road. Ronald Martin, a farmer whose brand-new Chevrolet did the same thing twice in 10 minutes, as the light made 2 separate passes. In simple terms, something in the air that night was strong enough to kill ignition systems, drain batteries, and snuff headlights, yet gentle enough not to harm the people inside the vehicles. No sparks, no burned wiring, no lingering effects once the glow departed. Just a quiet, temporary absence of electricity. By midnight, Sheriff Clem and Deputy Pat McCullough were driving the back roads themselves, headlights cutting pale tunnels through the dark. They saw it too, a brilliant oval crossing the sky low and slow, close enough to light the dashboard green before it climbed and disappeared. Within hours, 15 separate witnesses in 9 different locations around Levelland would report the exact same phenomenon: glowing object, stalled vehicle, instant recovery. All within a 4-hour window, all within a 7-mile radius, all describing the same silent, luminous visitor that seemed to float above the plains like a lantern carried by an unseen hand. The sightings began at 10:30 p.m. and ended just after 1:15 a.m., a span of less than 4 hours. But in that narrow window, the quiet cotton country around Levelland became the stage for a perfectly synchronized mystery. 10:30 p.m., Pedro Cecido and Joe Salas, 6 miles west of town. 10:50 p.m., Jim Wheeler, 4 miles north. 11:05 p.m., Newell Wright, near Smyre, 8 miles northwest. 11:15 p.m., Frank Williams, near Witherell, 7 miles northeast. 11:45 p.m., Ronald Martin. 2 separate stalls on the same road. 12:00 a.m., Jose Alvarez, engine and lights dead near the edge of town. 12:05 a.m., college student James Lee and his girlfriend, stalled while parked on a farm-to-market road. 12:15 a.m., Fire Marshal Ray Jones, answering a call, saw the glow himself. 12:45 a.m., Sheriff were Clem and Deputy McCullough, cruising outside Levelland, watched it cross the sky. 1:15 a.m., a final call from a farmer near sundown, 15 miles south, whose tractor lights dimmed as the object passed overhead. 10 separate locations, 15 adults, 2 teenagers, and 1 sheriff's department. None of them in radio contact, none of them friends, many of them strangers who had never met before or since. Yet every single one described the same object: an egg or football-shaped glow, 150 to 200 feet long, shifting from turquoise to white to faint orange, silent, moving low and slow until it decided to leave, then gone in the blink of an eye. Every vehicle affected lost power completely while the object was closest, then restarted on its own the instant the glow departed. No one reported burned wires. No one needed a jump start the next morning. Most witnesses reached for the phone only after they got home, shaken but calm, dialing the sheriff's office because that was what you did when something strange happened in Hockley County. They had no idea 9 other people were doing exactly the same thing. When Deputy McCullough took the calls, he kept a yellow legal pad on the desk. By midnight, the page was full of names, times, and mile markers that formed a near-perfect circle around Levelland. In kitchens lit by single bulbs, families gathered around percolators and listened to husbands or fathers tell the story in quiet, matter-of-fact voices. Children were sent to bed early but lay awake listening through thin walls. Dogs that had barked themselves hoarse finally settled. Outside, the cotton fields stretched silver under moonlight, and every porch light stayed on long after bedtime. People stepped onto lawns just to look up, half expecting, half hoping to see the glow drift past again. By morning, the town felt different. At the cafe on Avenue H, men who normally talked about rainfall and cotton prices now spoke in low tones about that light. No one laughed. No one exaggerated. They simply compared notes the way neighbors compare notes about a storm that missed one farm and soaked the next. Strangers separated by miles of dark highway, by fences and windbreaks and sleeping cattle, were all telling the same impossible story. One quiet, shared moment when the ordinary rules of engines and electricity paused, and something vast and luminous drifted through their night like a visitor who already knew its way home. 3 days later, on November 5th, a lone Air Force sergeant from Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock arrived in Levelland with a clipboard and a polite smile. He spent one afternoon interviewing Sheriff Clem, took brief statements from 4 of the 15 witnesses, and left before supper. No radar had recorded nothing. No aircraft were in the area. No unusual weather fronts had passed through. By December, the case was closed in the Blue Book files with a single, tidy label, ball lightning. The official explanation was delivered in calm, measured language. Ball lightning, the Air Force said, is a rare electrical phenomenon sometimes seen during thunderstorms, glowing spheres or ovals that can hover, drift, and occasionally interfere with electrical systems. A cold front had moved through that night, producing scattered showers and a little thunder far to the north. Moisture plus static electricity plus imagination, they suggested, could account for everything. Yet the witnesses never quite fit. Witnesses pointed out there had been only light mist, no thunderstorm within 50 miles. Ball lightning, when it appears at all, is usually small, basketball-sized at most, lasts seconds, and almost never travels miles across open country. It does not stall 9 separate vehicles in 9 separate locations, then allow every engine to restart the instant it departs. It does not appear identical to 15 different people who have never met. And it certainly does not leave sheriff's deputies, fire marshals, and college students describing the same 200-foot-long glowing egg with the same quiet certainty. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Blue Book's scientific consultant, later reviewed the file and called the explanation absurd. In private notes, he wrote that the case contained some of the most fascinating and puzzling elements I have seen, particularly the repeated electromagnetic effects timed perfectly to the object's proximity. Even Captain Gregory, the original Blue Book chief, admitted years later that Levelland remained one of the cases that kept him awake. The sergeant's report never mentioned that most witnesses refused to sign the pre-written statements handed to them, or that Sheriff Clem told friends the Air Force seemed more interested in closing the file than understanding what happened. The investigation lasted less than 8 hours. The witnesses have told the same story, unchanged, for nearly 70 years. Ball lightning is real, but it is shy and fleeting. Whatever drifted above the cotton fields that night was patient, deliberate, and large enough to light whole farmyards in shifting turquoise. It came and went on its own schedule, leaving behind engines that started themselves and people who no longer felt quite as alone under the Texas stars. But could ball lightning really explain engines dying and restarting in perfect synchronization with the object's presence? Even today, when meteorologists and physicists discuss Levelland, they speak softly, choose their words carefully, and usually end with the same quiet admission: we still don't know. Levelland matters because it refuses to fade. 15 ordinary people on ordinary roads experienced the same quiet interruption of the night electricity forgot how to work, then remembered again the instant a glowing visitor drifted away. No one was hurt. No one asked for attention. They simply told what they saw, in the plain words country people use when something too large for words happens under a familiar sky. Those electromagnetic effects, engines dying, lights dimming, radios falling silent, appear again and again across the decades. A lonely highway in Ohio in 1966, a police cruiser in Missouri in 1973, entire neighborhoods in Brazil in 1977, and, more recently, the instrument panels of Navy jets off both coasts flickering when metallic tic-tacs glide past. The pattern is gentle but persistent, like a signature written in the language of current and magnetism. Today, when pilots file UAP reports with the Pentagon and describe radar screens going blank or compasses spinning as a glowing sphere passes overhead, the level-end files are quietly pulled from the archives and placed on the table beside them. Same calm voices, same impossible timing, same soft return to normal once the visitor leaves. We may never know what drifted above the cotton fields that November night, yet the questions it left behind feel almost comforting in their patience. They remind us that some mysteries arrive without drama, linger just long enough to be noticed, then slip away, leaving the night a little wider than before. Close your eyes for a moment and picture those empty Texas roads, the low glow on the horizon, the sudden hush inside a car that has always started faithfully until tonight. Feel the cool air, the faint smell of rain that never quite arrived, the sense that something vast and courteous was simply passing through. As we'll see, Leveland was just the beginning of cases involving strange electromagnetic effects, gentle reminders that the sky still holds secrets it isn't ready to tell. On the morning of July 17, 1957, a sleek, six-engine RB-47H Stratojet lifted off from Forbes Air Force Base in Topeka, Kansas. To anyone watching from the ground, it looked like just another silver speck climbing into a clear summer sky. But inside the fuselage sat some of the most sophisticated electronic ears the Cold War had yet produced. The RB-47H was not a bomber, it was a flying laboratory. Its belly bristled with antennas, its compartments crammed with oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers, and reel-to-reel tape recorders. Officially, the aircraft belonged to the 55th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing. Unofficially, it was the Air Force's premier electronic intelligence platform, designed to map Soviet radar networks by provoking them into turning on, then recording every pulse rates, frequencies, and beam widths. The six-man crew were all seasoned officers, handpicked for sharp minds and cool nerves. Pilot, Major Louis D. Chase, 3,000 hours in Jet's co-pilot. First Lieutenant James McCoy, navigator. Captain Thomas Hanley, and in the rear compartment, the three Ravens, electronic warfare officers whose names alone carried weight in classified briefings. Major John Provenzano, EW-1, Captain Frank McClure, EW-2, Captain Walter Tuxerer, EW-3. Their equipment was state-of-the-art. The ALA-6 direction finding system, capable of pinpointing a radar source within 1 degree. The April 9th and April 4th receivers that could identify any Soviet signal from 70 MHz to 10 GHz, and the ASD-1 pulse analyzer that displayed radar characteristics like fingerprints on a glowing green screen. Every signal they recorded was time-stamped, triangulated, and preserved on magnetic tape, evidence that could be played back in secure rooms for months afterward. That morning's mission was routine. Fly a long racetrack pattern from Kansas across Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, then into the Gulf of Mexico, listening for anything unusual while practicing rapid descent and evasion tactics. The crew expected boredom, maybe a few routine ground radars to log. They took off at dawn, climbed to 34,500 feet, and settled into the quiet hum of engines and cooling fans. At 4:10 a.m. Central Time, somewhere over Mississippi, Captain McClure noticed the first anomaly. On his number 2 monitor, a strong, steady 3,000 MHz signal appeared, military radar frequency, but not one belonging to any known U.S. site. He called it out calmly. The others acknowledged, and the tape recorders began rolling. The signal was moving, fast, crossing their flight path from west to east at jet speed. McClure adjusted his directional antenna and watched the bearing needle swing. Whatever was transmitting was not on the ground. It was airborne and closing. The crew exchanged glances, but kept their voices level. They had chased Soviet ghost signals before, usually spurious reflections or malfunctioning beacons. This one felt different, crisp, powerful, and tracking them as though it had been waiting. Within minutes, the signal strengthened, shifted frequency slightly, and began pulsing in a pattern no American or Soviet radar used. The Ravens leaned closer to their scopes, fingers poised over switches, watching the impossible signature grow brighter. This crew had the training and equipment to detect and identify any aircraft in the sky, American, Soviet, experimental, or civilian. But what they encountered over the next 90 minutes would defy all their expertise, leave miles of magnetic tape filled with unexplainable data, and become one of the most thoroughly documented, yet least publicized, cases in the entire Project Blue Book archive. At 4:10 a.m., over the dark pine forests of central Mississippi, Captain Frank McClure's number 2 monitor lit up with a signal that shouldn't have existed. The pulse repetition frequency was 600 pulses per second, the carrier exactly 2,995 to 3,005 megahertz, a narrow band the U.S. military kept deliberately empty. The signal strength was S9, stronger than any ground radar within 500 miles. Yet the bearing kept shifting right to left across the scope, meaning the source was moving at high speed on a parallel course. McClure called it calmly, unidentified emitter, bearing 095, strength plus 20, airborne. Major Provenzano, at the ALA 6 direction finding set, confirmed within seconds, bearing steady 090, elevation plus 5 degrees. It's above us and closing. The cockpit tape recorder clicked on automatically. For the next 8 minutes, the signal tracked them perfectly, staying 30 to 40 miles off their right wing, occasionally sweeping them with short, intense bursts as though interrogating their own transmitters. Every time the RB-47's defensive jammers came alive, the unknown signal simply shifted frequency by a few megacycles and continued painting them. It was textbook behavior for an advanced tail chase radar. Except no Soviet aircraft in 1957 could fly at 34,500 feet and 500 knots while carrying a transmitter that powerful. At 4:39 a.m., pilot Lewis Chase banked gently southeast toward Jackson. The signal mirrored the turn instantly, maintaining exact distance. Chase pushed the throttles forward. The unknown matched speed without effort. McClure muttered, almost to himself, "This thing is flying formation on us." Then, at 4:42 a.m., everything changed. Chase and co-pilot McCoy both saw it at once. A brilliant white-blue light, far brighter than Venus, moving left to right across their windshield at tremendous speed. It crossed their flight path in under 2 seconds, then slowed dramatically and began pacing them on the right side, now only 10 miles away and slightly higher. The light was steady, no strobe, no navigation lights, just an intense, pure glow the size of a small house. In the rear compartment, McClure's scope exploded with data. The unknown had closed to 8 miles and was now emitting on multiple frequencies simultaneously, sweeping the RB-47 from 2.8 to 3.1 gigahertz in a pattern no human radar operator had ever been trained to produce. Provenzano's direction finder locked dead on the visual light. The electronic bearing matched the visual bearing within half a degree. For the first time in aviation history, a highly trained crew with million-dollar instruments was watching an unknown object with both their eyes and their instruments. And every piece of equipment agreed it was real. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Chase's voice came over the intercom, quiet and professional. "Whatever it is, it's flying with us now." What started as a curious electronic signal was about to become a chase across 4 states, lasting 90 minutes, covering 700 miles, and leaving behind 36 feet of magnetic tape filled with data that even the National Security Agency, years later, could not explain. The glowing object settled into a perfect station-keeping position, 10 miles off the RB-47's right wing, slightly higher, matching every turn, every climb, every change in airspeed as though it were attached by an invisible wire. The crew had flown against MiG-15s over Korea. They had practiced against every known Soviet radar. Nothing in their training had prepared them for this quiet, effortless companionship. Over Louisiana, the light suddenly accelerated, crossing ahead of the aircraft in a gentle arc and reappearing on the left side before the pilots could even bank. Ground radar at England AFB briefly painted an unidentified return doing the same maneuver, then lost it when the operator blinked. South of Dallas, at 5:30 a.m., the object climbed smoothly to 40,000 feet in seconds and hovered there, a steady star-like point against the first pale hint of dawn. Major Chase eased the RB-47 up to 35,000 feet to get a better look. The light responded by descending to their exact altitude and resuming its 10-mile pace. In the rear compartment, Captain McClure's voice stayed level as he narrated into the recorder. Target now bearing 270 relative, range 9.5 miles, altitude match within 200 feet. Signal strength unchanged. This is not a reflection. Over Fort Worth, the game changed again. The object dropped behind the aircraft, close to 5 miles, then vanished from both visual and electronic view. For 3 quiet minutes, the scope stayed empty. The crew exhaled. Then, without warning, the signal reappeared dead ahead, now 300 miles away near the Texas Panhandle, as though it had simply skipped the distance in the blink of an eye. Chase pushed the throttles to the firewall. The RB-47 surged to 510 knots. The unknown kept its new position effortlessly. At 5:58 a.m., Duncanville Air Force Station in Texas suddenly lit up the RB-47's radio with urgent calls. Unidentified traffic at your 12 o'clock, 40 miles, no transponder, extreme speed. Their ground radar had acquired the same object, now pacing the aircraft from the front. For the next 9 minutes, the Duncanville operators tracked 2 distinct targets, the known RB-47 and an unknown moving in perfect synchronization. Then the glowing light blinked out. Duncanville's scope went blank. The RB-47's monitors went silent. The crew flew on in stunned quiet, the only sound the soft whistle of air over the canopy and the low hum of tape reels still turning. Near the Oklahoma border, the light returned, this time below them, skimming the dark earth at treetop height. It rose in a smooth spiral, passed beneath the fuselage close enough that the pilots felt the aircraft buffet slightly, and took up station on the right wing again. McClure's scope painted it at 500 feet relative, less than a mile away. For 30 surreal seconds, the crew flew in formation with something that cast no shadow, made no sound, and left no wake. Over western Oklahoma, the object finally seemed to tire of the game. It climbed vertically until it became a tiny spark against the emerging stars, pulsed once, bright, almost friendly, and vanished upward at a speed the human eye could not follow. Every instrument fell silent at the same moment. The tapes kept rolling for another 5 minutes, recording only the soft breathing of 6 experienced officers who no longer knew quite what to say. For over an hour, across 4 states and 700 miles of night sky, this object had appeared and disappeared, playing a game that suggested both technology and intelligence far beyond our own, never threatening, never hurried, simply curious, or perhaps politely making its presence known to the most advanced electronic aircraft in the United States Air Force inventory. What makes the RB-47 case stand apart is not just the duration or the maneuvers. It is the quiet, almost perfect alignment of 3 independent channels of evidence that rarely, if ever, agree in any other sighting. First came the visual confirmation. 6 pairs of trained eyes, pilots in the cockpit and the three Ravens watching through periscopes and side windows tracked a brilliant, steady light that changed position in ways no afterburner or landing light could. They saw it pace, climb, descent, and sudden disappearance with the naked eye against a clear pre-dawn sky. No optical illusion, no star, no temperature inversion can fly formation for 90 minutes. Second was the airborne electronic confirmation. The RB-47's ALA 6-direction finding system locked onto a powerful microwave emitter at 2.8 to 3.1 GHz. Bearings matched the visual light within 1/2 degree. Signal strength rose and fell in exact correlation with the object's distance. When the light blinked out, the signal vanished simultaneously. When the light reappeared, the signal returned on the same bearing and strength. The data were recorded on 3 separate tape decks, time synchronized to the second. Third, and perhaps most compelling, was the ground radar confirmation. At 5:58 a.m., the Air Force's own FPS-10 long-range radar at Duncanville, Texas, acquired the unknown for 9 consecutive minutes. Operators watched 2 distinct returns. The known RB-47 at 34,500 feet and an unidentified target moving in perfect synchronization. Same speed, same turns, same altitude changes. When the object finally climbed out, Duncanville saw it streak upward off the top of their scope. The radar log entry is still in the Project Blue Book file. Unknown number 4889, confirmed by multiple operators. For those 9 minutes, the sighting was no longer a crew hallucination or instrument malfunction. It was a physical object being tracked by 3 unrelated systems: human eyes, airborne passive receivers, and an active ground radar hundreds of miles away. The geometry was impossible to fake. The timing was simultaneous. The correlation was exact. Dr. James McDonald, the atmospheric physicist who later studied the raw data, called it the most impressive single case in the Air Force files from the standpoint of multiple high-quality sensor systems. Even the skeptical Condon Committee, tasked in the late 1960s with closing the UFO question once and for all, devoted more pages to the RB-47 than to any other incident, yet could reach no conventional explanation. This level of corroboration, visual, airborne electronic, and ground radar, all agreeing in real time across hundreds of miles, would make the RB-47 case one of the most scientifically valuable UFO encounters on record, a quiet, meticulously documented event that still sits in the archives, waiting for anyone willing to listen to the tapes and read the logs with an open mind. When the RB-47 landed back at Forbes AFB, the crew was met by intelligence officers who took custody of every tape, logbook, and scribbled note. For weeks, the recordings circulated through classified channels. Wright-Patterson, the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence, even the National Security Agency. The sheer volume of data, over 36 feet of magnetic tape, synchronized radar plots, and sworn statements, made the case impossible to ignore. Yet when the final Project Blue Book report appeared, it carried the quiet label aircraft/possible plasma. The explanation unfolded in careful stages. The initial 3 GHz signals, they claimed, were actually misidentified returns from a distant American Airlines flight that happened to be in the area. The later signals and visual light were attributed to anomalous propagation and a rare atmospheric plasma that somehow mimicked intelligent movement. Ground radar contacts at Duncanville were dismissed as mirage echoes caused by temperature inversions over Texas. Each step sounded reasonable on paper until one examined the details. The American Airlines flight was on a completely different heading, 500 miles away when the strongest signals were recorded and flying at 20,000 feet lower. The plasma theory could not account for a glowing object that maintained exact formation for 90 minutes, nor for the ground radar that tracked it performing coordinated turns with the RB 47. Temperature inversions do not climb vertically off the top of a scope at thousands of miles per hour. Dr. James McDonald, after spending months with the original tapes and debriefing the crew, called the official explanation completely untenable. Gordon David Thayer of the Condon Committee, tasked with re-examining the case in 1969, concluded that no conventional phenomenon can explain the combination of visual, electronic, and ground radar observations. Even Blue Book's own scientific consultant, astronomer J. Allen Hynek, later wrote privately that the RB-47 remained one of the most puzzling cases in my files. Despite the quality of evidence, 6 experienced officers, state-of-the-art sensors, ground radar corroboration, and miles of preserved recordings, Project Blue Book would struggle to provide an adequate explanation. The file was closed with polite, cautious language that satisfied no one who had actually listened to the calm, measured voices on the cockpit tapes describing something that simply should not have been there. Years later, when the crew members were finally free to speak openly, they all said the same thing. Whatever flew with them that morning was real. It was under intelligent control, and it wanted them to know it was there. In the early hours of September 19, 1976, Tehran was sleeping under a warm, late summer sky. The city's million lights shimmered across the valley like scattered jewels, the Alborz Mountains standing silent and black against a canopy of stars. Most residents had closed their shutters against the lingering heat of the day, but at 12:30 a.m. the switchboards at Mehrabad International Airport and the Imperial Iranian Air Force Command Post began to light up with quiet, urgent calls. It's a very bright object, like a star, but much bigger, and it's changing colors: red, green, blue, orange, so fast you can't follow. It's hovering over northern Tehran. Now it's moving. My children are frightened. It's too bright to look at directly. By 1 a.m., the tower supervisor at Mehrabad stepped outside the control building and saw it himself. A brilliant, diamond-shaped light hanging motionless at perhaps 6,000 feet above the Shamiran district. Through binoculars, it looked solid, rectangular at the bottom, with pulsing colored lights at each corner and a steady white glow in the center. It was larger than any aircraft, utterly silent, and clearly not a helicopter or balloon. The duty officer at IAF headquarters, Colonel Mayini, listened to the reports with growing concern. Iran's airspace was tightly controlled, and anything unidentified over the capital was treated as a potential threat. At 1:30 a.m., he ordered the scramble of an F-4 Phantom II from Cherokee Air Force Base, 120 miles south. Minutes later, Captain Aziz Khani lifted off into the clear night, afterburners glowing orange against the dark. As the jet climbed toward Tehran at supersonic speed, the object remained visible to dozens of ground observers and to the Mehrabad radar operator, who now had a solid return on his screen. At 40 miles out, the pilot acquired it visually, a dazzling multicolored star that seemed to grow larger the closer he flew. At 25 miles, the F-4's instruments began to malfunction. Communications crackled and died. Navigation systems flickered. The weapons control panel went dark. The pilot instinctively turned away. The moment he did, all systems returned to normal. He reported the failure calmly, then broke off the engagement and returned to base. At 1:40 a.m., a second F-4, flown by Lieutenant Youssef Pervez Jafari, was scrambled. Jafari approached from the south, radar-locked the object at 27 nautical miles, and closed fast. Ground radar confirmed the target was the size of a Boeing 707 tanker, yet it had no transponder and was performing gentle, impossible maneuvers. As Jafari closed to weapon range, the object suddenly accelerated, moving from a near hover to hundreds of knots in seconds, and began pacing the Phantom at a steady distance. Then, without warning, a smaller, brilliant cylinder detached from the main object and streaked straight toward the jet. Jafari's radar warning receiver screamed. His weapons panel again went dead. He executed a sharp diving turn, but the smaller object matched every move. Only when he rolled inverted and dove toward the earth did it break off and return to the larger craft. What happened next would be documented in classified files that wouldn't be declassified for decades. Files that would travel from Tehran to the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the White House, and eventually into the public record as one of the best instrumented, most dramatic military encounters in UFO history. The first F-4 to launch that night was flown by Captain Mohammad Reza Azizkhani, a seasoned instructor pilot with over 2,500 hours in the Phantom and combat experience along the Iraqi border. At 1:30 a.m., he climbed out of Cherokee, afterburners blazing, and turned north toward Tehran at Mach 1.2. The night was crystal clear. The city lights of the capital glimmered like a carpet far ahead. Ground radar handed him the target at 70 nautical miles, bearing 005 degree, altitude 6,000 feet, no transponder, no IFF response. Azizkhani armed his AM, 9 Sidewinders and AM, 7 Sparrows out of habit, though he had no hostile intent yet. At 40 miles he acquired the object visually, an intense, multicolored rectangle brighter than anything he had ever seen in the sky. Through his gun sight it appeared solid, the size of a large house, with steady white light in the center and strobing red, green, blue, and orange at the corners. At 27 nautical miles his radar locked cleanly. The scope painted a return stronger than a KC-135 tanker. Azizkhani called the lock to the ground controller, voice calm, almost curious. Then, at exactly 25 miles, everything changed. The cockpit filled with static. His UHF radios went dead, no carrier tone, no side tone, nothing. The intercom between front and back seat crackled and died. The inertial navigation system spun lazily, then blanked. The weapons control panel flickered once and went dark, every caution light illuminated in sequence, as though someone were calmly switching them off one by one. The compass card rotated slowly in a full circle and froze. Azizkhani felt the jet continue straight and level, yet every instrument that relied on electricity or electronics had simply stopped working. He instinctively rolled 90 degrees left and pulled the nose down, turning away from the object. The moment the glowing rectangle remained motionless, almost patient. Within seconds of breaking off the intercept, the radios crackled back to life, the INS realigned itself, and the weapons panel glowed green again. Azizkhani's backseater, Lieutenant Hossein Shokri, came on the intercom with a single quiet sentence. All systems normal now. Azizkhani reported the malfunction in measured tones, requested vectors back to base, and was told to return immediately. As he turned south, he glanced over his shoulder. The object was still hanging in the same spot, colors pulsing gently, as if it had never noticed the jet at all. Fuel state was no longer comfortable. There was no point in pressing the engagement. He descended toward Cherokee in silence. The only sound the soft rush of air over the canopy and the low whistle of the turbines winding down. When he taxied in 20 minutes later, the ground crew found nothing wrong. Every system checked green. No blown fuses, no tripped breakers, no burnt wiring. The jet was perfectly healthy. Later, in the debriefing room lit by a single desk lamp, Azizkhani told the intelligence officer the same thing he had told the controller. The closer he flew, the more his aircraft was disabled. The farther away he moved, the more it recovered. He drew a simple graph on a napkin. Distance versus system failure, a perfect correlation. No one in the room laughed. As soon as he backed away, his systems returned to normal, as if the object was protecting itself with a calm, invisible hand that reached inside a supersonic fighter and simply turned the electricity off until the visitor was left in peace. At 1:48 a.m., the second F-4 Phantom roared off the runway at Cherokee. piloted by Lieutenant Pervez Jafari, soon to be promoted to Major, an aggressive, confident flyer known for pushing his jet to the edge of the envelope. Jafari had listened to Aziz Khani's debrief on the secure line and was determined to get closer. He climbed hard to 25,000 feet, lit both afterburners, and streaked north at Mach 1.6. Ground radar painted the object still hovering over northern Tehran, now joined by a second, smaller return orbiting the main body like a satellite. At 40 miles, Jafari acquired it visually, an enormous diamond of light, corners flashing red, green, blue, orange in rapid sequence, the center a steady, blinding white. Through his HUD, it looked the size of a full moon. At 27 nautical miles, his APQ-120 radar locked solid. The return was stronger than any tanker he had ever seen. Jafari armed an AM-9 Sidewinder. The growling tone filled his headset. He closed to 15 miles, then 10. The object suddenly accelerated from a hover to over 1,000 knots in seconds and began pacing him on the left side, keeping perfect formation at 7 miles. Jafari rolled left to turn toward it. The object mirrored instantly, staying exactly off his wing. Then, without warning, a brilliant cylindrical object, glowing bright orange-red, detached from the main craft and streaked straight toward the Phantom at tremendous speed. Jafari's radar warning receiver screamed. The smaller object was radar locked on him. In the same heartbeat, his entire weapons control panel went dark. The Sidewinder tone died. The cannon selector froze. Every caution light illuminated. His backseater, Captain Jalal Demirian, shouted, "We've lost weapons." Jafari broke hard right and dove, pushing the jet past redline. The orange cylinder followed every turn, closing the distance in seconds. At 3 miles, it looked like a glowing missile with no exhaust plume. Jafari rolled inverted, pulled 7 Gs, and dove toward the desert floor at 450 knots. The cylinder matched the maneuver effortlessly, then suddenly veered upward and rejoined the larger object as if nothing had happened. Jafari leveled at 12,000 feet, breathing hard. The main diamond now hovered motionless again. He circled cautiously at 15 miles, weapons still dead. Then a second small object, this one sparkling white, dropped from the bottom of the diamond and descended straight down. Jafari watched, stunned, as it landed softly in a dry riverbed near Ray, 30 miles south of Tehran. The ground lit up in a perfect circle of white light for several seconds before fading. Ground observers later reported a brilliant flash in the same area. Throughout the chase, the main object continued flashing its colors in what Jafari later described as almost a greeting. When he finally turned south to return to base, the diamond simply rose vertically and vanished upward, leaving only fading stars. In the debriefing room hours later, Jafari, calm, articulate, eyes still wide, told U.S. Air Force Colonel Roland Evans, sent from Tehran to investigate. It was not an airplane. It was not a flying object with performance no aircraft on Earth could match. When I tried to fire, my systems were taken away. When the small one came at me, I thought I was dead. But it never attacked. It simply warned. What Major Jafari experienced that night would haunt him for the rest of his life, and would be considered one of the most significant military UFO encounters ever documented, recorded by 2 separate airborne radars, ground radar, multiple pilots, and preserved in declassified U.S. and Iranian files that still circulate quietly among researchers today. At first light on September 19th, an Iranian Air Force helicopter carrying General Yusufi Nazar Yusufi, commander of the IEF, and several intelligence officers, flew low over the dry riverbed south of Ray where the white object had descended. From 500 feet, they saw a perfect circle of flattened grass and scorched earth about 30 meters across. The soil inside the ring was baked hard. Geiger counters clicked slightly higher than background, though not dangerously so. Soil samples taken that morning and analyzed at Tehran University showed elevated radiation levels that faded over the following weeks. No fragments were found, but local farmers reported their compasses spun uselessly when held near the spot for several days afterward. Back at Cherokee, maintenance crews ran full diagnostics on both F-4s. No blown fuses, no burnt wiring, no tripped breakers. Yet both aircraft had suffered identical, total loss of weapons and communications systems at the exact moment of closest approach. The faults disappeared the instant the jets turned away. The radar warning receivers had recorded powerful microwave bursts in the X-band, far stronger than any ground jammer in the region. Technicians could offer no explanation. The radar tapes from Mehrabad's FPS-20 search radar and the F-4's own APQ-120 fire control radars were rushed to IAF headquarters, then hand-carried by diplomatic pouch to the U.S. Defense Attaché office in Tehran. Within days, they reached the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington. The DIA report, declassified in 1978 and now widely available, runs 13 pages and is written in unusually strong language for an official intelligence document. Key excerpts. An outstanding report. This case is a classic which meets all the criteria necessary conditions for a valid study of the UFO phenomenon. The object was confirmed by visual observation from the ground and from 2 separate aircraft, plus multiple radar tracks. Electromagnetic effects, loss of communications and weapons systems, occurred simultaneously with closest approach. The credibility of many of the witnesses, particularly the high-ranking military personnel involved, is beyond question. Civilian corroboration poured in. Hundreds of Tehran residents had watched the colored lights from rooftops and balconies between 1 o'clock and 2:30 a.m. Many filed written statements. Air traffic control logs, pilot debriefs, and the helicopter crew testimony, and the radar films all aligned to the minute. No discrepancies, no contradictions. Even the normally skeptical U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff, General George S. Brown, was briefed. In a rare public comment later that year, he told reporters, "I don't know what it was, but it was something." The evidence was so compelling, multiple independent radars, instrumented military aircraft, physical traces on the ground, and high-ranking observers, that U.S. intelligence agencies considered it one of the most credible UFO reports they had ever received. The DIA file ends with a quiet, almost wistful sentence. The case remains unexplained. The Tehran incident did not happen in a vacuum. In September 1976, the United States and the Soviet Union were still locked in a tense Cold War. Yet here was an event that ignored every border, every ideology. Iranian F-4s, American-built, flown by pilots trained in Texas, were disabled in midair by something that paid no attention to whose flag was painted on the wings. The radar tapes and soil samples ended up on desks in Washington within days, not because Iran was an enemy, but because the phenomenon itself had forced cooperation. That is the quiet power of cases like Tehran. They remind even the most powerful militaries that some questions are larger than geopolitics. When a supersonic interceptor loses its weapons and communications at the exact moment it tries to engage, and when the same thing happens to pilots speaking Farsi over Tehran or English over Washington, the message feels universal. The sky does not belong to any one nation. Neither, apparently, do the visitors within it. For decades, the UFO topic was dismissed as an American curiosity, born of post-war jitters and Hollywood imagination. Tehran shattered that illusion. Similar reports had already come from Brazil, Belgium, South Africa, Australia, and the Soviet Union itself. Military pilots chased by glowing discs, radar screens lighting up, instruments failing in perfect synchronization with the unknown. The phenomenon was behaving the same way on every continent, indifferent to language, politics, or religion. In the years that followed, Retired generals from half a dozen countries would sit in quiet conference rooms and compare notes. Same lights, same maneuvers, same electromagnetic effects. No one accused anyone else of secret weapons testing. Everyone simply nodded, recognizing the same calm, impossible visitor. From the cotton fields of Levelland to the crowded rooftops of Tehran, from the frozen runways of Alaska to the deserts of Saudi Arabia, these encounters suggested something truly global was occurring, something that has watched humanity for a very long time, revealing itself in measured glimpses to whoever happens to be looking up at the right moment. And perhaps that is the most comforting thought of all. Whatever these lights are, they do not seem to care whose flag we fly. They simply remind us, gently and persistently, that we are all sharing the same small planet under the same vast sky. Portage County, Ohio, in the early hours of April 17, 1966, felt like the kind of place time had politely agreed to slow down for. The towns were small, the farms wide, and the roads mostly empty after midnight. Streetlights glowed soft amber along Route 14, and every porch light in Ravenna seemed to be off except for the all-night diner on the edge of town. Deputy Dale Spoor, 31, lean and soft-spoken, had been with the sheriff's department 6 years. His partner that night was Wilbur Barney Neff, a mounted deputy who preferred the quiet of night shifts. They rode in a single cruiser, a black and white Plymouth with the heater running low against the spring chill. Coffee steamed in paper cups between them. The radio crackled only occasionally, mostly routine checks and the soft voice of the dispatcher, Flo Henninger, back at the Ravenna station. At 4:58 a.m. the radio came alive with something unusual. A woman in Summit County, just west of Portage, had called in a panic. A glowing object the size of a house had risen from the woods near her home, flown low over her car, and disappeared eastward. She was shaken but sober. The Summit dispatcher asked Portage units to be on the lookout. Spoor and Neff were near Atwater, 10 miles away. They acknowledged the call with the easy boredom of men who expected to find a low-flying plane or maybe kids with flares. They turned east on Route 224, headlights cutting pale tunnels through the dark fields. At 5:10 a.m., just past a lonely stretch outside Ravenna, Spoor slowed the cruiser. Ahead, low in the sky, hovered a brilliant, self-illuminated object, perfectly round, perhaps 40 feet across, glowing with a cold white light that hurt to look at directly. A faint bluish cone of light pointed downward like a silent spotlight. It made no sound, left no trail, and simply hung there, motionless, above the treetops. Spoor eased the cruiser to the shoulder. Both deputies stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. The night air smelled of damp earth and distant lilacs. The object began to rise slowly, smoothly, as though noticing them. Then it drifted eastward, staying just above the power lines, bright enough to cast their shadows on the road. Neff's voice was quiet. "Dale, that ain't no airplane I ever saw." Spoor reached for the radio handset. "Ravenna, car 2. We've got that thing in sight. It's big and bright, and heading east toward you." Flo's reply came back calm, but curious. 10-4, car 2. Keep us advised." The object accelerated slightly, staying low, following the highway as if it knew the route. Spoor slid back behind the wheel. Without discussion, they pulled onto the road and followed, headlights off so the glow wouldn't wash out their view. The cruiser's speed crept past 70, then 80. The object never hurried. It simply moved ahead at whatever speed they chose. Always the same distance, always silent. What these officers saw would turn a quiet night shift into an 86-mile chase across 2 states. One that would involve half a dozen police departments, leave the men shaken, and eventually draw the attention of Project Blue Book, Congress, and a nation that still preferred its mysteries to stay politely in the sky and out of the lives of ordinary people. Deputy Spoor eased the Plymouth back onto Route 14, headlights still off. The object drifted ahead at 35 miles an hour, low enough that its glow lit the treetops silver. It never wobbled, never wavered, just moved with the calm certainty of something that knew exactly where it was going. Spore matched its speed, then nudged the accelerator. The object responded instantly, accelerating to 50, then 60, always staying the same comfortable distance ahead. Neff rode shotgun, microphone in hand, voice steady despite the scene in front of them. Ravenna, car 2. We're eastbound on 14, pursuing the object. It's the size of a house, perfectly round, bright white with a blue-white cone underneath. No sound, no exhaust. Speed now 60 and increasing. Dispatcher Flo Henninger's reply came back soft and careful. 10-4 Dale. You sure it's not an advertising plane or helicopter? Negative, Flo. No navigation lights, no strobe, no rotor noise. It's just a big glowing thing. They passed the dark farms outside Ravenna at 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. The object stayed 300 to 400 yards ahead, sometimes rising gently to clear a hill, sometimes dropping until it almost brushed the telephone wires. Every time Spore backed off the throttle, it slowed too. When he pushed the cruiser past 100, the glowing disc simply widened the gap without effort, as though politely keeping them in sight. At Deerfield, the road curved south. The object banked smoothly and followed the highway, its underside now showing a faint ring of reddish-orange light that pulsed slowly. Spore felt the hair rise on his arms. He had chased speeding trucks and drunk drivers for years, but nothing had ever led him like this. Never hurried, never frightened, simply guiding. Neff kept the radio alive. Passing Deerfield Circle now, still eastbound. Object is pacing us perfectly. It's brighter than the moon, Barney. I can read the speedometer by its light. Other units began checking in, Portage deputies, Ohio State Patrol, even a cruiser from Columbiana County. Everyone wanted to know what car 2 was chasing. Spore's voice stayed flat, professional, the way you talk when you don't want to sound crazy. Tell them it's real. Tell them it's right in front of us. Near the little town of Berlin Lake, the object suddenly climbed to perhaps 1,000 feet and hovered, bathing the entire valley in cold white light. Spore braked hard. For 30 long seconds they sat on the empty road staring up at it, engine ticking as it cooled. The disc hung motionless, silent, immense. Then, almost gently, it began moving again, east toward Pennsylvania, slowing just enough for the cruiser to catch up. Spore pressed the accelerator again. Duty and disbelief wrestled behind his eyes. He had a wife asleep at home, a little boy who liked stories about police cars. None of those stories had ever included this. Mile after mile, past sleeping farms and dark churches, past crossroads where the only light came from the object itself, it seemed to stay just ahead of them, as if it wanted to be followed. Not fleeing, not threatening, simply leading 2 small-town deputies and their Plymouth down an endless ribbon of Ohio highway, deeper into a night that had quietly stopped obeying the normal rules. As Spore and Neff raced east on Route 14, the radio net grew crowded with calm, incredulous voices. At 5:25 a.m., Patrolman Wayne Houston of East Palestine, Ohio, pulled onto the highway from a side road and fell in behind car 2. Houston had heard the running commentary for 10 minutes and decided to see for himself. He caught up at 90 miles an hour and simply said over the air, "I've got it too." Same thing. Big, bright disc, pacing you about half a mile ahead. Minutes later, the chase crossed the state line into Pennsylvania. Near Negley, Pennsylvania State Trooper Frank Panzanella heard the Ohio traffic bleeding across the frequency, turned on his overhead lights, and joined the convoy. Now 4 law enforcement vehicles, 2 Ohio cruisers, and 2 Pennsylvania units were strung out along Route 51, all watching the same silent object glide ahead at whatever speed they chose. At 5:32 a.m., Panzanella's voice came over the air, quiet and matter-of-fact. "Pennsylvania 17 to base. Confirm visual on large illuminated object, approximately 45 to 50 feet diameter, traveling east at vehicle speed plus 10. Altitude 3 to 400 feet. No sound. It's lighting up the whole valley. From 5 different vantage points, the descriptions matched perfectly. Perfectly round, self-luminous white disk, faint blue-white cone or ice blue cone, pointing downward, occasional reddish-orange glow around the rim, silent, steady flight. No wings, no exhaust, size estimated between 35 and 50 feet across. The officers never left their cars at the same time, never conferred in person, never exaggerated. They simply reported what their trained eyes saw while driving with lights flashing through the pre-dawn darkness. Near Conway, Pennsylvania, just west of Pittsburgh, Patrolman Henry Kwiatkowski heard the pursuit on his radio, drove to a hilltop overlook, and watched the object approach from 20 miles away. He later told investigators it looked like a bright $50 held at arm's length, bright enough to cast shadows on the hood of his cruiser. When the convoy passed beneath him, he fell in behind. Now 5 police cars in a silent, high-speed procession following a glowing disc across 2 states. Radio logs from 4 separate agencies: Portage County Sheriff, Columbiana County Sheriff, Ohio State Highway Patrol, and Pennsylvania State Police. All recorded the same times, same mile markers, same comm descriptions. No officer contradicted another. No one suggested Venus or a weather balloon. They simply kept driving, kept watching, kept reporting. By the time the chase ended just after sunrise near Pittsburgh, 5 police officers from 2 states had witnessed the same impossible object for over 80 minutes, covering 86 miles of highway. Their combined testimony, recorded in real time on official police tapes and later sworn before investigators, forms one of the strongest chains of trained observer corroboration in UFO history. When the object finally climbed into the morning sky near Conway, Pennsylvania, just after 6 a.m., Dale Spoor and Barney Neff simply sat in their cruiser, engine idling, staring at the empty horizon. The chase was over, but the silence felt heavier than the pursuit. They turned west and drove the long, quiet miles back to Ravenna, arriving as the town was waking up. Within hours, the story broke nationwide. Reporters camped on Spoor's lawn. Television crews followed him to the grocery store. Radio hosts replayed the police tapes and laughed openly. Flying saucer cops became the punchline of the week. Jay Leno's predecessor, Johnny Carson, invited Spoor on The Tonight Show, not to listen, but to mock. Spoor declined. Project Blue Book's explanation arrived quickly. The officers had first chased a communications satellite, Echo 1, then the planet Venus. The explanation ignored the fact that the satellite had not yet risen, that Venus was low in the east while the object flew west, and that 5 separate police cruisers had followed it for 86 miles. When Spoor pointed these facts out to a local reporter, the Air Force simply repeated the same statement louder. The ridicule was relentless. Children pointed at Spoor's cruiser in town. Anonymous phone calls came at 3 a.m., drunk voices laughing. "Seen any saucers lately, officer?" His wife, Denise, cried in the kitchen while neighbors whispered. Within months, the marriage unraveled. Spoor left the sheriff's department, unable to face the daily jokes in the squad room. He drifted through jobs: gas station attendant, truck driver, mill worker, always carrying the same quiet look in his eyes. Barney Neff stayed on the force, but never spoke of the night again unless asked directly. Wayne Houston and Frank Panzanella requested transfers to quieter beats. All of them aged faster than their years. In 1978, when researcher Jenny Zeidman interviewed Spoor for a book, he was living alone in a small apartment in West Virginia. He told her softly, "I didn't ask for this. I just did my job. I saw what I saw. And nobody's ever going to laugh that out of me." His voice cracked only once, when he added, "Sometimes I still look up at night and wonder if it's looking back." The others carried similar scars. Careers stalled. Friendships cooled. families fractured. They had done nothing more than report what 5 trained observers watched for over an hour. Yet speaking the truth cost them the ordinary lives they had known. For these officers, coming forward with the truth meant sacrificing everything they'd worked for: reputations, marriages, peace of mind, all traded for one long, luminous night they could never explain and would never forget. Project Blue Book's investigation began 10 days later, when Major Hector Quintanilla arrived in Ravenna with a thin folder and a firm conclusion already in mind. He interviewed only Spoor and Houston, not Neff, Panzanella, or Kwiatkowski, and spent less than 2 hours on site. No attempt was made to reconstruct the route or check police radio tapes against astronomical records. On May 3, 1966, Blue Book issued its final report. The deputies had first mistaken the reentry of an Echo series communication satellite for a low-flying object, then chased the planet Venus for the remaining 80 miles. Case closed. Astroplanet misidentification. The explanation collapsed under the lightest scrutiny. The Echo satellite re-entered over the Pacific that morning. It was never visible from Ohio. Venus was low on the eastern horizon at sunrise, while the object traveled west to east, rose to thousands of feet, hovered, and finally climbed vertically. 5 separate police officers in 5 separate cars watched it for 86 miles at speeds up to 103 miles per hour. Venus does not pace police cruisers, and satellites do not hover. Quintanilla dismissed the radio logs as excitement-induced exaggeration and the multiple independent testimonies as contagious hysteria. When asked how Venus could cast shadows inside a moving car, he replied that the officers were simply over-imaginative. The ground radar confirmation from Greater Pittsburgh Airport, which briefly tracked an unknown at 3,000 to 4,000 feet, was ignored entirely. Years later, when the Blue Book files were declassified, astronomer J. Allen Hynek, Blue Book's own consultant, wrote privately that the Portage County explanation was embarrassing and clearly inadequate. Even the Condon Committee's 1969 review quietly noted the Venus/satellite theory does not fit the reported facts. The explanation satisfied no one, least of all the officers who had seen the object up close, felt its light on their faces, and watched it rise into the dawn sky with their own tired eyes. The official file was stamped closed, but for Dale Spoor and the others, the case never ended. It simply followed them home and stayed there, quiet and luminous, for the rest of their lives. In December 1980, the twin RAF bases of Woodbridge and Bentwaters sat quietly on the misty coast of Suffolk, 2 small American islands in the soft green English countryside. By day the bases looked almost sleepy, rows of gray Nissen huts, chain-link fences, and the occasional roar of an A-10 Thunderbolt climbing into the low clouds. But at night, especially during the Christmas stand-down, the perimeter lights glowed like cold stars against the black pine forest that pressed close on every side. Rendlesham Forest itself felt older than the bases, older than England. Locals called it the Old Wood. Its Scots pines grew in perfect darkness, trunks straight and tall, needles whispering in the wind that moved down from the North Sea. On still nights the forest swallowed sound. No owls, no foxes, only the faint creak of branches and the distant murmur of waves 2 miles away. Children in the nearby villages spoke of lights seen among the trees for generations. Will-o'-the-wisps, fairy lanterns, things best left alone. Inside the wire, the mood was different. Bentwaters and Woodbridge were home to the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing, and beneath the east gate of Woodbridge lay one of the largest nuclear weapons storage areas in Western Europe. Dozens of W-84 warheads waited in hardened bunkers, guarded by silent sentries in parkas and white scarves, breath fogging in the freezing air. The Cold War was at its frostiest. Soviet submarines prowled the North Sea, and every airman knew that if the balloon went up, Suffolk would be on the front line. Christmas 1980 had been quiet. Most families had flown home. The bases ran on skeleton crews. The mess halls served turkey with tinned cranberry sauce, and someone strung colored lights along the squadron bar. By the evening of December 25th, the temperature had dropped to -8°C. Frost glittered on the runways, and the forest beyond the fences looked like a wall of black glass. At 3 a.m. on December 26th, Boxing Day morning, Security Police Patrolman John Burroughs and Jim Peniston were walking the east perimeter road of Woodbridge, boots crunching on frozen gravel. The night was perfectly clear, stars sharp enough to cut. They paused to light cigarettes, cupping the flames against the wind, when both men noticed an odd glow deep in the trees, too steady for a poacher's lamp, too blue-white for aircraft lights. Over the radio net came a calm voice from the Central Security Control. "We've got lights in the forest again. Looks like a possible aircraft down." Burroughs and Peniston exchanged a glance. Aircraft crashes happened. They trained for them. But this light wasn't falling. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, between the trees. In the early morning hours after Christmas, security personnel would encounter something in those woods that defied all military protocol, something that would leave radiation readings, broken branches, and questions that still drift through Rendlesham Forest like frost that never quite melts away. At 3:03 a.m. on December 26, 1980, Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston and Airman First Class John Burroughs climbed into a Jeep at the east gate of RAF Woodbridge and drove slowly toward the glowing light in Rendlesham Forest. Both men were trained security police. Peniston, 25, a no-nonsense NCO with 9 years in the Air Force. Burroughs, 20, quiet and observant. They carried sidearms, flashlights, and radios, expecting a downed aircraft or poachers. The forest road narrowed to a frozen track. They left the Jeep and moved on foot, boots crunching through brittle pine needles. The temperature hovered near zero. Their breath hung in the air like ghosts. At first the light seemed distant, filtered through dense trunks, but as they pushed deeper it resolved into something mechanical, steady, structured, and possibly bright. They broke into a small clearing and stopped. On the ground, no more than 20 meters away, sat a small triangular craft, approximately 9 feet across at the base, 3 meters high. It rested on thin legs or emitted no heat, no exhaust, only a silent corona of white light edged with blue. Around it the air felt charged, like the moment before lightning. The pines at the edges of the clearing were illuminated from below, every needle sharp and silver. Peniston's first thought was that it was a prototype, American, Soviet, something classified. He raised his camera, but the flash refused to fire. The radio filled with static. Burroughs felt his watch slow, then stop. Time itself seemed to thicken. Peniston moved closer, slowly, deliberately. The object's surface was black, glass smooth, like polished obsidian, yet warm to the touch. He ran his gloved hand along one facet and felt a faint vibration, almost a pulse. Around the middle ran a band of raised symbols, triangles, circles, half-moons, etched or molded into the material, glowing faintly from within. They looked ancient, yet precise, like nothing he had ever seen in any briefing book. He circled the craft once, twice. No seams, no rivets, no intakes. At the apex a red light pulsed slowly. Smaller blue lights traced the edges. The surrounding ground was depressed in 3 perfect circles where the craft rested. Rabbits in the underbrush sat motionless, ears forward, as though listening. Burroughs hung back, heart hammering. He later described a pressure in his head, a low-frequency hum he felt in his teeth. Peniston, closer, felt calm, unnaturally calm, as if the object were projecting stillness. After perhaps 10 minutes the craft began to brighten. The white light intensified, shifting to a pure, painful brilliance. Peniston stepped back instinctively. The object rose silently, no rush of air, no sound. Simply lifted above the treetops, hovered for a moment, then accelerated upward in a blur of light and vanished toward the coast. The forest fell dark again. Their watches resumed. The radios crackled back to life. They stood in the clearing for a long time, flashlights trembling slightly, staring at the 3 indentations in the frozen earth and the broken branches above. What Peniston saw and felt would be etched in his memory forever. Symbols he couldn't identify, materials he couldn't explain, and a presence that seemed almost alive, as though the craft had been aware of them the entire time. By the evening of December 27th, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, Deputy Base Commander of RAF Bentwaters, had heard enough rumors to be quietly irritated. A tough, by-the-book officer with 20 years in the Air Force, Halt dismissed the talk of lights in the woods as overactive imaginations and too much Christmas beer. When reports came in again that night, multiple security posts seeing the same red and blue lights dancing above the forest, he decided to put the matter to rest personally. At 10:30 p.m., he assembled a small team. Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, Airman John Burroughs, still shaken from the first night, Master Sergeant Bobby Ball, and a handful of security policemen. They carried powerful light-alls, night vision scopes, a Geiger counter, cameras, and, most importantly, Halt's handheld cassette recorder. The temperature had dropped to -10 Celsius. Frost crackled under their boots as they walked the half-mile from the east gate into Rendlesham Forest. Halt switched on the recorder the moment they entered the trees. His calm, measured voice would later become known worldwide as the Halt tape. We're at the edge of the forest now, star-like objects to the north, south, and overhead. One is moving, very erratic. Minutes later, the team reached the clearing from the previous night. The 3 indentations were still there, perfectly spaced. The Geiger counter clicked slightly above background. Halt narrated everything in real time. We found a depression about 6 inches deep, triangular. Radiation is about 1/10 milliroentgen, higher than the surrounding area. Then the lights returned. A red glowing orb, the size of a basketball, appeared low over the trees to the east. It hovered, pulsed, then moved deliberately toward them. Halt's voice on the tape stays calm, but quickens. It's coming this way. Pieces of it are shooting off. It's dropping something. Looks like molten metal. The orb exploded silently into 5 white objects that scattered in different directions. One shot straight up and vanished. Another moved over the base itself, sweeping the ground with beams of light. Security posts at Bentwaters radioed in near panic. The object was now hovering above the weapons storage area, the most sensitive part of the entire facility. Halt's team followed the lights deeper into the forest, pushing through undergrowth, breath fogging. At one point, a brilliant beam came down directly in front of them, illuminating the pines like daylight. Halt's voice on the tape cracks for the first time. There's a beam coming down. It's like a laser, right on the ground in front of us. Now it's moving away. For nearly 3 hours, they tracked the objects across the forest and fields. Beams swept the ground, flashed across the sky, and at one point shot directly upward like searchlights in reverse. Halt kept narrating, sometimes laughing nervously, sometimes whispering in awe. We're looking at an object about 100 to 200 feet away. It's moving, breaking up again. I've never seen anything like this in my life. By 4 a.m., the lights finally faded toward the coast. The team walked back in silence, frost on their uniforms, the tape recorder still running. Halt's final words on the recording are soft and almost wondering. Gentlemen, I don't know what we just saw, but it was under intelligent control. 3 weeks later, he wrote an official memorandum to the Ministry of Defense titled Unexplained Lights, describing everything in careful military language. That memo, and the 18-minute tape that still exists today, would make Rendlesham Britain's most documented military UFO encounter, and one of the most credible anywhere in the world. A deputy base commander's official memorandum would document one of the most credible UFO cases in history, recorded in real time by a man whose job it was to protect nuclear weapons from any threat, earthly or otherwise. Unlike many UFO cases that vanish with the dawn, Rendlesham left traces you could touch, measure, and photograph. At first light on December 26th, security police returned to the clearing and found 3 triangular indentations pressed into the frozen forest floor, each about 9 feet apart, forming a perfect equilateral triangle. The holes were 7 to 9 inches deep and 12 to 18 inches across, as though something heavy had rested on thin legs. The surrounding pine needles were scorched in a faint circular pattern. When a starlight night vision scope was placed in the depressions, it aligned perfectly with the broken branches overhead, confirming the object's exact departure path. Lieutenant Colonel Halt's team returned the second night with a full radiation survey kit. A portable /PDR 27 Geiger counter registered beta/gamma readings of 0.1 milliroentgen per hour in the indentations, 10 times higher than background levels in the surrounding forest. A second instrument, the more sensitive PDR 60, showed similar spikes. Readings dropped to normal just a few feet away. Halt noted the numbers on tape and in his official memo. The trees told their own story. At the center of the triangle, a mature Scots pine had its upper branches snapped outward and downward, as if something had risen directly through the canopy. Bark was stripped in places. Smaller branches were cleanly broken, not crushed. Similar damage appeared on 2 other trees along the departure trajectory, consistent with a rapid vertical ascent. Photographs taken that week show the indentations filled with frost, the broken branches still fresh, and the radiation team at work. Sketches made by Peniston, Burroughs, and others matched the photos exactly. Casts were taken of the holes. One plaster cast still exists in private hands. In 1983, British UFO researcher Jenny Randalls arranged for soil samples from the site to be analyzed at a London laboratory. Results showed elevated levels of certain isotopes and a slight acidification of the soil, unusual for that part of the forest. In 2010, local researcher John Hansen commissioned further tests using modern spectrometry. Traces of rare earth elements were found in higher than normal concentrations, though the results remain debated. Most importantly, on January 13, 1981, Lieutenant Colonel Halt submitted his official memorandum to the UK Ministry of Defence. Typed on USAF letterhead and marked subject, Unexplained Lights, the 3-page document lists times, locations, radiation readings, and the names of 20 military witnesses. It ends with the understated line. The individuals reported seeing a strange glowing object in the forest. The object was difficult to describe, but was later seen to be a mechanical-type craft. The Ministry of Defense never explained the memo, the indentations, the radiation, or the broken trees. The file was quietly archived and only released decades later under Freedom of Information requests. Unlike many UFO cases, Rendlesham left evidence that could be measured, photographed, and analyzed. Evidence that still sits in the Suffolk soil and in the official archives of 2 governments, waiting for anyone willing to walk into the forest with an open mind and a Geiger counter. The Ministry of Defense received Halt's memorandum in January 1981 and responded with practiced silence. A brief internal memo from the Defense Intelligence Staff, DS-8, dismissed the lights as possibly the Orford Ness Lighthouse, despite the lighthouse being 8 miles away and in the wrong direction, and suggested misperception of stars and aircraft. No site visit was ordered, no radiation data requested, no interviews conducted. The file was stamped of no defense significance and buried. Only in 2002, after persistent Freedom of Information requests, did the MOD release Halt's memo, the radiation readings, and a handful of supporting documents. A second, larger tranche followed in 2006. then another in 2018. Among the pages were previously unseen statements from radar operators at Bentwaters who confirmed unexplained returns on December 26th and 28th, and a letter from a former RAF squadron leader admitting the incident had been discussed at high levels but deliberately downplayed. Successive British governments maintained the same line: no threat to national security, no evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, case closed. Yet the released files told a different story. Senior officers expressing private concern, requests for briefing the Prime Minister quietly refused, and repeated instructions to keep this low-key. In the decades since, Rendlesham has become Britain's Roswell. The forest clearing is now signposted. The indentations, though softened by time, are still visible. New witnesses continue to surface. A former RAF radar technician in 2010, a British police officer who saw the lights from the road in 2015, a retired USAF colonel who confirmed the weapons storage area was illuminated by an unknown object for several minutes. Each adds another quiet layer to an already thick file. The case has influenced modern UAP policy on both sides of the Atlantic. When the Pentagon's ARO office published its 2024 historical review, Rendlesham was listed among a handful of international incidents still unresolved. British researchers played a key role in the 2023 NASA UAP Independent Study Team, often citing the HALT tape and radiation data as examples of high-quality military evidence. Today, on clear December nights, locals and visitors still gather at the old East Gate, hoping for a glimpse of the lights that once turned a quiet Suffolk forest into the epicenter of Britain's most compelling UFO mystery. Decades later, Rendlesham remains Britain's most documented and debated UFO case, with new witnesses still coming forward and the forest itself keeping its secret as patiently as it has for centuries. On the evening of November 17, 1986, Japan Airlines cargo flight 1628 lifted off from Reykjavik, Iceland, bound for Tokyo with an intermediate stop in Anchorage. The aircraft was a brand-new Boeing 747-200 freighter, only 6 months old, carrying a light but valuable load: 126 cases of French Beaujolais Nouveau wine destined for the annual November release celebrations in Japan. At the controls sat Captain Kenju Terachi, 47, a veteran JL pilot with over 10,000 hours and 29 years of accident-free flying. In the right seat was First Officer Takanori Tamefuji. In the jump seat, Flight Engineer Yoshio Tsukuda. All three were calm, experienced, and quietly proud to be delivering the season's first wine shipment on schedule. After refueling in Anchorage, JL 1628 departed at 4:55 p.m. local time into a crystal-clear Arctic night. The temperature at altitude was -45 Celsius. The northern lights shimmered pale green far to the north. Below them stretched the endless white wilderness of interior Alaska, rivers frozen silver, mountain ranges black against the stars, not a single light for hundreds of miles. The flight climbed to 35,000 feet on a westerly heading toward the Fort Yukon VOR, then would turn south over Canada. Everything was routine. Autopilot engaged, coffee steaming in the cockpit, the soft hum of the four Pratt and Whitney engines, and the occasional quiet exchange in Japanese. At 5:09 p.m., as they passed a beam of Fairbanks, Captain Terachi noticed two faint glows far ahead and slightly below. Too dim for aircraft lights, too steady for meteors. He watched them idly, assuming distant military jets. Then, at 5:11 p.m., the night outside the windshield changed forever. Two clusters of lights, brilliant, structured, and impossibly fast, materialized directly in front of the 747. One moment the sky was empty. The next, two objects hovered in formation a mile or two ahead, bathing the cockpit in amber and white light so intense the pilots instinctively shielded their eyes. Tarachi's first calm words over the intercom would later become famous. "Something is here, right in front of us." What began as a routine cargo run across one of the most remote air corridors on Earth was about to become one of the best documented, radar-confirmed UFO encounters in commercial aviation history. An event witnessed by 3 veteran crewmen, tracked by military and civilian radar, and investigated jointly by the FAA and Japan's Civil Aviation Authority. At 5:11 p.m., Captain Tarachi would see something that his 30 years of flight experience couldn't explain, and the quiet Alaskan night would never feel quite so empty again. At 5:11 p.m., 2 clusters of lights appeared about 2,000 feet below and 30 degrees left of the nose. They were not the soft glow of distant aircraft. They were sharp, rectangular arrays, rows of amber-white panels that looked almost like glowing portholes or exhaust nozzles arranged in perfect squares. Captain Tarachi leaned forward, squinting against the glare. "They're pacing us," he said quietly. First Officer Tamefuji and Flight Engineer Tsukuda crowded the cockpit windows. The objects rose smoothly to the 747's altitude, then slid sideways until they flew in formation, one off the left wing, the other off the right, about a mile away. Each cluster consisted of 2 distinct tiers of lights, an upper row of 8 bright rectangles, a lower row of 8 more, all pulsing in slow sequence like organ pipes lighting up one after another. The cockpit filled with an orange-amber glow strong enough to illuminate the instrument panels and the pilots' faces. Tarachi felt warmth on his cheeks, as though someone had opened an oven door. The objects kept perfect station, matching the 747's 525 knots without visible effort. No navigation lights, no strobes, no anti-collision beacons, just those structured panels glowing against the black Alaskan night. Tarachi reached for the radio. His voice stayed calm, almost conversational. "Anchorage Center, Japan Air 1628. We have traffic, 2 of them, flying formation with us. Very bright lights. Request information." Anchorage replied that they had no traffic in the area. The controllers sounded puzzled but polite. For 8 minutes the 2 objects flew alongside, never wavering. Tarachi banked gently left. The objects mirrored the turn instantly. He leveled. They leveled. When he clicked on the weather radar, the screen lit up with 2 strong primary returns exactly where the lights were. No transponder, no altitude readout, just solid, hard echoes. Then, without warning, both clusters shot forward and stopped dead ahead of the 747, now less than a mile away. The light intensified, washing the windshield in orange. The crew felt heat on their faces and hands. Tamefuji later said it was like sitting in front of a giant fireplace. And then the smaller objects vanished. In their place, a single enormous object materialized, pale white, walnut-shaped, easily twice the length of the 747. Its surface was seamless, faintly luminous, with a dark equatorial band running around the middle. It hovered directly in the flight path at 35,000 feet, filling the windshield from edge to edge. Tarachi instinctively pulled the 747 up into a shallow climb. The object rose with them, maintaining distance. The cockpit temperature rose noticeably. The pilots could feel warmth through their uniforms. Tarachi's voice on the cockpit voice recorder stayed steady, but the words carried a note no pilot ever wants to use. "It's huge, much bigger than our aircraft. It's right in front of us." What they would see next would dwarf their Boeing 747, an object so massive it seemed impossible, yet tracked by military radar, photographed by the crew, and documented in real time by 3 veteran airmen who had spent their lives trusting only what their instruments and eyes could confirm. At 5:19 p.m., the 2 smaller clusters of lights vanished, and in their place hung a single, colossal object, pale, almost luminous, perfectly symmetrical. Captain Tarachi's first thought was scale. The thing was enormous. easily twice the length of an aircraft carrier, perhaps 1,500 to 2,000 feet from end to end. Against the black Alaskan sky, it appeared as a gigantic walnut-shaped silhouette, slightly flattened, with a raised central ridge and a dark equatorial band that ran its entire circumference like a Saturn ring seen edge-on. Tarachi later drew it carefully in his official report. A smooth, seamless hull, no wings, no tail, no visible engines. The surface glowed faintly from within, giving it a soft, moon-like quality. Along the dark central band, faint rectangular panels flickered in slow sequence, as though something inside was cycling power. The object filled the entire windshield of a Boeing 747 at 1 mile distance, something no known aircraft or airship could ever do. Anchorage Center asked for confirmation. Tarachi's voice remained calm, but carried unmistakable wonder. It is a gigantic spaceship. Very big. It is following us now. The object slipped behind the 747, then reappeared on the left side, pacing them at exactly the same speed and altitude. For the next 32 minutes it stayed there, a silent white leviathan against the stars. The onboard weather radar painted it continuously as a strong primary target. The military radar at Elmendorf Air Force Base later confirmed the same return. Tarachi turned south toward Talkeetna. The object turned with him. He climbed to 39,000 feet. It climbed. He descended back to 31,000. It descended. Every maneuver was mirrored perfectly, never closer than 5 miles, never farther than 10. The cockpit stayed warm. The crew could feel gentle heat through the windows whenever the object was on their side. At 5:39 p.m., a U.S. Air Force E-3 Sentry AWACS was vectored toward them from Elmendorf. The moment the military aircraft appeared on the horizon, the giant craft simply winked out. 1 second it filled half the sky. The next, the night was empty. Only faint afterimages danced on the pilot's retinas. For 50 minutes, from 5:11 to 6:01 p.m., this massive object had paced their aircraft across 250 miles of Alaskan wilderness, visible to 3 veteran pilots, painted on civilian and military radar, and described in identical detail by all 3 crew members in separate interviews. Captain Tarachi's hand-drawn sketches, submitted to both JL and the FAA, show the same enormous, smooth, ring-shaped scene by Tamefuji and Tsukuda. In his written statement, he added one quiet line that still resonates. It was under intelligent control, and it wanted us to know it was there. For 50 minutes, this massive object would pace their aircraft, visible on radar, yet unlike anything in any aviation manual, a silent giant that flew alongside a routine cargo flight, and then simply vanished into the Arctic night, leaving 3 shaken pilots and a cargo hold full of Beaujolais that suddenly felt very small. The sighting was not limited to 3 pairs of human eyes. From 5:19 to 5:51 p.m., the FAA's Anchorage Air Route Traffic Control Center radar painted a primary target moving in perfect synchronization with JL 1628. Controller John Aderholt watched the unknown return appear suddenly, then tracked the 747 at identical speed and heading for over 30 minutes. When Captain Tarachi executed a 360-degree turn near Talkeetna, the object mirrored the turn exactly, behavior no conventional aircraft or weather phenomenon could replicate. Aderholt later told investigators, "It was there, plain as day, and it was not clutter." At the same time, a U.S. Air Force E-3 Sentry AWACS orbiting over central Alaska acquired the same target on its powerful APY-1 radar. The military tape, later obtained by the FAA, shows a large primary return pacing the 747 at distances between 5 and 10 miles. When the 747 descended from 39,000 to 31,000 feet, the unknown descended with it. The AWACS crew tracked it continuously until it vanished at 5:51 p.m. Inside the cockpit, the 747's own Bendix RDR-1F color weather radar painted the object as a strong green echo whenever it was in front. Flight engineer Tsukuda photographed the radar screen multiple times. The images show a distinct, elongated return far larger than any aircraft echo they had ever seen. 3 independent radar systems, civilian ground, military airborne, and the 747's onboard set, all confirmed the same thing. A large, solid object performing coordinated maneuvers with a commercial airliner for over half an hour across 200 miles of airspace. When the FAA's chief investigator, John Callahan, later reviewed the data in Washington, he brought together radar tapes, voice recordings, and handwritten controller logs. The evidence was so compelling that the CIA requested a briefing. Callahan preserved the original radar data on computer disks that still exist today. Multiple controllers and military personnel corroborated the pilot's timeline to the minute. No conflicting traffic, no balloons, no experimental aircraft. Only one unexplained primary target that appeared, flew formation, and disappeared simultaneously on every scope. With radar confirmation from civilian ground stations, U.S. Air Force AWACS, and the 747's own weather radar, 3 separate systems using different frequencies and locations, this case would become one of the best documented airline UFO encounters in aviation history. Evidence so strong that even the FAA's official report could only conclude the object was real and unexplained. The morning after the encounter, Captain Tarachi and his crew were met at Narita Airport by JL executives and FAA representatives. For 12 hours, they were interviewed separately, their sketches compared, their radar photos examined. The pilots never wavered, every detail matched. The FAA's John Callahan flew to Tokyo with the radar data and concluded, these men saw something real. Yet within weeks the tone changed. Despite the evidence, the FAA's public statement called the incident unexplained but of no danger to aviation. Behind closed doors the pressure was different. Japan Airlines quietly removed Tarachi from international cargo routes and reassigned him to domestic flights, then to a desk job. His 30-year career flying 747s across the Pacific ended overnight. When he spoke publicly about the sighting, JL banned him from all flight duties. Colleagues avoided him in the crew lounge. Some whispered he had lost his nerve. Tamefuji and Tsukuda kept their jobs, but never flew together again. Both refused interviews for years, fearing the same fate. The radar tapes and voice recordings were preserved by Callahan, who later testified that senior CIA and Reagan White House officials attended a secret briefing and ordered the data not be released to the public. The official line remained, possible ice crystals or atmospheric phenomenon. Tarachi never recanted. In quiet interviews years later, he said softly, I told the truth. I lost my dream of flying the big jets, but I kept my honor. Once again, trained professionals with impeccable credentials, 10,000-hour captains, military radar operators, air traffic controllers, faced ridicule and career damage for reporting what their instruments and eyes had recorded in perfect agreement. The evidence stayed in locked files while the pilots carried the weight alone. In the humid early hours of July 24, 1948, Eastern Airlines Flight 576, a Douglas DC-3, cruised at 5,000 feet above central Alabama. The aircraft was bound from Houston to Atlanta with 20 passengers dozing in the soft drone of twin Pratt and Whitney engines. At the controls sat 2 of Eastern's most experienced pilots, Captain Clarence S. Childs, 31, a former Air Transport Command veteran with over 8,000 hours, and co-pilot John B. Whitted, 29, another decorated wartime pilot. Both men were known for calm nerves and clear heads. At 2:45 a.m., near Montgomery, Childs noticed a bright light ahead and slightly to the right, low on the horizon. He assumed it was a military jet from Maxwell Field. Then the light accelerated toward them at impossible speed. In seconds, the object filled the windshield. A glowing, torpedo-shaped craft, roughly twice the length of a B-29, about 100 feet, with no wings, no tail, no propellers. Its fuselage was dull aluminum or magnesium, glowing orange-red along the underside as though heated. 2 rows of square, brilliantly lit windows or ports ran along its side, emitting a blue-white radiance so intense the cockpit lit up. A trail of orange flame 30 to 50 feet long shot from the rear, bright enough to cast shadows inside the DC-3. Childs banked hard left. Whitted grabbed the yoke to help. The object streaked past their right wing, so close they felt the slipstream rock the aircraft. As it passed, both pilots saw a distinct nose, rounded and slightly pointed, and the long fiery exhaust that ended in a sharp constriction like a pinched flame. Whitted's voice was calm but urgent. "Clarence, that was no airplane. That thing had no wings." The entire encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. The object climbed vertically at tremendous speed and disappeared into a broken cloud layer. One passenger, Clarence L. McElvey of Columbus, Ohio, woke during the evasive turn and later confirmed seeing a bright streak of light pass the plane with a roar like artillery. Childs radioed Atlanta, voice steady. "We just had a near collision with some kind of rocket ship. No wings, 2 rows of windows, huge orange flame out the back." The Air Force's Project Sign investigators took the report seriously. Childs and Whitted were interviewed separately in Atlanta within hours. Their sketches matched perfectly. Astronomer J. Allen Hynek, then a young consultant, later called it one of the most impressive early cases. The pilots never wavered, even when skeptics suggested a meteor. Meteors do not fly horizontally, display windows, or cause turbulence. The encounter, combined with the Mantell tragedy earlier that year, convinced many in the Air Force that something real and advanced was sharing American airspace. Project Sign's secret estimate of the situation cited Childs Whitted as evidence of possible extraterrestrial origin before the report was ordered destroyed by General Hoyt Vandenberg. This case would help convince the Air Force to take UFO reports seriously, and for decades it remained one of the strongest pilot-witnessed encounters in the early years of the modern UFO era. 2 decorated aviators risking ridicule to report what they saw in the clear Alabama night. In the last weeks of August 1951, the West Texas city of Lubbock lay under a vast, cloudless sky that felt close enough to touch. The nights were warm, the streets quiet, and the Milky Way poured across the heavens like spilled cream. Then, for several evenings, something began moving through that perfect darkness. It started on August 25th when 3 Texas Tech professors, Dr. W.I. Robinson, geology, Dr. A.G. Oberg, chemical engineering, and Dr. W.L. Ducker, petroleum engineering, were sitting in Dr. Ducker's backyard on 34th Street, drinking coffee and watching for meteors. At 9:20 p.m., a loose semicircle of 15 to 30 pale greenish-white lights swept overhead in perfect silence, traveling from north to northwest at tremendous speed. The lights were soft-edged, slightly larger than stars, and arranged in a gentle arc. They crossed the sky in 4 or 5 seconds and vanished. The professors were stunned. They were scientists, trained observers, and they knew birds, planes, and meteors. This was none of those. Over the next 10 days, the same formation appeared repeatedly, sometimes once a night, sometimes twice, always silent, always fast, always in that same graceful V or crescent. By August 30th, the entire city was watching. Hundreds of citizens, housewives on porches, teenagers in cars, policemen on patrol, saw the lights. On August 31st, Texas Tech freshman Carl Hart Jr., an amateur photographer, stood in his backyard with a Kodak 35 camera and waited. When the lights returned, he snapped 5 clear photographs. Perfect V formations of glowing orbs against the starry sky, sharp enough to show individual lights and their spacing. The images made front pages nationwide. Life magazine ran them full page. The professors counted 30 separate sightings among credible witnesses, including themselves. Descriptions never varied. 20 to 30 luminous objects, pale bluish-green, traveling in precise geometric patterns, no sound, no trails, speeds estimated at over 1,000 miles per hour. Project Blue Book sent Captain Edward Ruppelt to investigate. He interviewed the professors, examined Hart's negatives, ruled authentic by Air Force photo labs, and admitted privately the case troubled him. The official explanation settled on migrating plovers reflecting city lights. Yet plovers do not fly in perfect V formations at 1,000 miles per hour, nor do they glow from within, and Lubbock streetlights in 1951 were dim sodium vapor, orange, not bluish-green. The professors rejected the bird theory politely but firmly. Dr. Ducker later said, "I've watched birds all my life. These were not birds." The Lubbock lights would be photographed, witnessed by scientists, corroborated by hundreds of ordinary citizens, and remain unexplained. One of the clearest examples of structured, high-speed objects moving intelligently over an American city, captured on film and etched into the memory of an entire community that still looks up on quiet August nights, half hoping to see them again. On the night of October 1st, 1948, Lieutenant George F. Gorman, a 25-year-old North Dakota Air National Guard pilot and former B-25 instructor with combat experience in World War II, was flying a routine cross-country in a P-51 Mustang over Fargo. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and the city lights below twinkled peacefully. At 9 p.m., while preparing to land at Hector Airport, Gorman noticed a small, blinking light about a mile away, flying below and behind a Piper Cub that was also in the pattern. The tower confirmed only the Cub was present. Curious, Gorman told the tower he would investigate. He dropped his wing tanks, pushed the throttle forward, and closed on the light. What followed was 27 minutes of aerial maneuvering that no P-51 pilot should ever lose. The object was a smooth, round white ball, 6 to 8 inches in diameter, with a steady glow and occasional flickering. No wings, no fuselage, no exhaust, just a perfect sphere of light. Gorman dove on it from 5,000 feet. The object shot straight up. Gorman followed, pulling 4 Gs, climbing at full power. At 14,000 feet his engine began to cough from lack of oxygen, but the light kept rising effortlessly, leaving the Mustang behind. Gorman rolled out and tried again, coming in from the side at 350 miles per hour. The object turned sharply toward him, head-on. Gorman banked hard. The light passed so close he felt the slipstream rock his wings. Tower controller Lloyd Jensen and the Cub pilot, Dr. A.D. Cannon, watched the entire dance from the ground, seeing the P-51's running lights chasing a smaller, brighter light that darted and turned impossibly. For times Gorman attempted intercepts. Each time the object outclimbed, outturned, and out-accelerated the Mustang. At one point, it executed a perfect vertical climb from 7,000 to 14,000 feet in seconds, performance that would have torn any known aircraft apart. When Gorman tried a final head-on pass at full throttle, the lights simply stopped dead, forcing Gorman to yank the stick and zoom overhead, nearly stalling. Finally, at 9:27 p.m., the object climbed vertically at tremendous speed and vanished into the stars. Gorman's Mustang was soaked in sweat and low on fuel. He landed shaken but unhurt. In his official statement, he said, "I am convinced there was thought behind its maneuvers. I had the distinct impression that it was playing with me." The tower confirmed the visual chase on radar and by eye. Project Sign investigators interviewed Gorman, Jensen, and Cannon separately. All accounts matched perfectly. The Air Force labeled it a weather balloon, but privately officers admitted no balloon could perform 11G turns or outrun a P-51. An experienced combat pilot had been outmaneuvered for nearly half an hour by something that shouldn't exist, something that danced rings around one of the fastest piston fighters in the world and then simply flew away, leaving only a shaken lieutenant and a control tower full of witnesses who would never quite look at the night sky the same way again. On Friday afternoon, April 24, 1964, Socorro, New Mexico police officer Lonnie Zamora, 31, a no-nonsense patrolman respected by everyone in town, was chasing a speeding black Chevrolet on Highway 85 when he heard a loud roar and saw a blue-orange flame descending behind a nearby hill. Thinking a dynamite shack had exploded, he broke off the pursuit and drove toward the arroyo. What he found would become one of the strongest physical trace UFO cases in history ever recorded. Topping the gravel ridge at 5:45 p.m., Zamora saw a shiny, egg-shaped object, white aluminum in color, about the size of a car, resting on four thin legs in a dry gulch. Beside it stood two small figures in white coveralls, child-sized, perhaps, or adults of slight build. One turned and appeared to notice Zamora's patrol car. Startled, Zamora radioed, possible 10 to 50 accident, something there. As he stepped out and walked closer, a loud roar began, low at first, then rising in pitch. Blue-orange flame shot from beneath the object. Terrified, Zamora stumbled, lost his glasses, and ran for cover behind the car. When he looked up, the craft was rising silently on a pillar of flame, the legs retracting. It leveled off, flew slowly south, then accelerated and disappeared in seconds. No sound after the initial roar, no smoke, only a faint smell of burning brush. Zamora's frantic radio call brought Sergeant Sam Chavez racing to the scene within 2 minutes. Together they found four angular, wedge-shaped indentations forming a rough rectangle 12 by 18 feet, pressed 4 to 6 inches into hard, dry soil. Several small, circular footprints in the dust point, 4 separate patches of creosote bush and grass still smoldering. Flames licked upward in perfect cones, as though heated from above, fused sand and glassy residue at the center of the landing area. Within hours the site was cordoned off. Army Captain Richard Holder, FBI agent Arthur Burns, and New Mexico State Police converged. Photographs, soil samples, and plaster casts were taken. Radiation readings were slightly elevated but within normal variation. The next day, Dr. J. Allen Hynek arrived, Project Blue Book's chief scientific consultant and an avowed skeptic. He spent 2 days interviewing Zamora, examining the site, and testing every conventional theory. Burning jetpack? No fuel residue. Experimental lunar lander? No military unit claimed it. Hoax. The bushes had been burned from above, not below, and the indentations showed downward pressure of several tons. Hynek later wrote privately, "There is much more to this case than meets the eye. Zamora is a good, honest officer. I believe he saw something real." Publicly, he remained cautious, but in a 1966 letter, he called Socorro the Rosetta Stone of UFO cases. The Air Force file lists 27 witnesses who saw either the object, the flame, or both, including 5 tourists who arrived minutes after takeoff and independently reported a strange craft flying low. No explanation was ever found. This case would puzzle even the most skeptical investigators, including Project Blue Book's chief scientific consultant, leaving behind burned bushes, compressed desert soil, and the shaken testimony of a small-town policeman who never sought fame and spent the rest of his life quietly insisting he had seen something that simply should not have been there. On the cold, clear afternoon of January 7, 1948, Captain Thomas F. Mantell, Jr., 31, a decorated World War II pilot who had flown P-51 Mustangs over Normandy, climbed into his F-51 51D at Standiford Field, Kentucky. He was leading a ferry flight of 4 National Guard fighters from Georgia to Kentucky when Godman Army Airfield Tower urgently requested they investigate a large, metallic object hovering high over the base. Mantell, a calm, competent officer with over 2,800 hours, acknowledged the call. He had no oxygen aboard. Routine ferry flights didn't require it above 15,000 feet, but he took the lead anyway. At 2:30 p.m., he radioed. "It's above me and moving about half my speed. It appears metallic, tremendous in size. I'm going up to take a closer look." His 3 wingmen followed to 15,000 feet, then turned back when hypoxia set in. Mantell kept climbing alone. His last transmission, at 3:15 p.m., was calm. "It's still above me, making my speed, or better. I'm going to 20,000 feet. If no closer, I'll abandon chase." He never came down. At 3:18 p.m., witnesses near Franklin, Kentucky, saw a P-51 in a tight spiral trailing smoke. The fighter spiraled into a farm field and exploded. Mantell died instantly. When rescuers reached the wreckage, his watch had stopped at 3:18. The object had been seen by hundreds, state police, tower personnel at Godman, civilians across 3 states. All described a bright, circular object, high and motionless for over an hour, then slowly moving west. Radar at Godman tracked it briefly before it vanished. The Air Force first announced Mantell had chased Venus in daylight, despite Venus being low on the horizon and invisible in bright sky. Then, weeks later, they revealed a secret Navy Skyhook balloon had been aloft nearby. The balloon was huge, metallic, and capable of reaching 100,000 feet. Case closed. Yet problems remained. Skyhook balloons in 1948 were classified. The nearest known launch was days earlier and hundreds of miles away. No record of a balloon over Kentucky that day has ever surfaced, even after declassified files. Mantell's wingman, interviewed separately, insisted the object was not a balloon. It moved against the wind, accelerated when pursued, and was far too bright. Alan Hynek later wrote that the Skyhook explanation was forced and unsatisfactory. Captain Edward Ruppelt, first head of Project Blue Book, called Mantell's death a tragedy that didn't need to happen. Thomas Mantell left behind a wife and 2 small children. He received a posthumous Distinguished Flying Cross for service above and beyond the call of duty. At his funeral in Louisville, fellow pilots stood silent as the flag-draped coffin passed, knowing one of their own had died chasing something the Air Force still could not name. The Mantell incident would serve as a tragic reminder that UFO investigations could have real, deadly consequences, and that even the best pilots, doing their duty with courage, could meet something in the sky that no training manual had ever prepared them for. After walking through these 10 cases, from a Kentucky captain in 1948 to an Iranian fighter pilot in 1976, from Texas cotton fields to Alaskan skies, certain patterns emerge so clearly they feel almost gentle in their persistence, like a quiet voice repeating the same message across 30 years. First, the electromagnetic signature. Cars stall and level end and restart the moment the light departs. 4 phantom weapons panels go dark over Tehran the instant the pilot tries to lock on. The RB-47's million-dollar receivers are bathed in precise microwave bursts timed to the glowing object's distance. Compasses spin, radios fall silent, engines die, always in perfect synchronization with the object's proximity, always returning to normal the moment it leaves. This is not random interference. It is controlled, selective, almost courteous. Second, radar refuses to look away. Washington National, Duncanville, Elmendorf, Tehran, Bentwaters, ground radars, airborne radars, weather radars, military radars on different frequencies and continents, all paint the same impossible targets performing the same impossible maneuvers. Primary returns with no transponders. Objects that appear, hover, accelerate to thousands of miles per hour, stop dead, and vanish. Radar operators, trained to dismiss ghosts and clutter, watch in real time and reach for the phone. Third, the witnesses themselves form a pattern. Commercial pilots with decades in the air. Fighter pilots who flew combat in Korea and Vietnam. Law enforcement officers on lonely night shifts. Radar technicians in underground bunkers. Deputy base commanders guarding nuclear weapons. These are not dreamers or attention seekers. They are people whose professional lives depend on accurate observation and calm judgment, and every one of them, separately, describes the same thing. Fourth, the performance defies physics as understood in their era. Right-angle turns at Mach speeds. Vertical climbs from hover with no sonic boom. Acceleration from standstill to radar loss in seconds. Silent flight at treetop height by objects the size of houses. No wings, no exhaust in most cases. No heat signature except when they choose to show flame. These are the same behaviors we see in modern UAP reports from Navy carriers. And finally, the behavior itself suggests awareness. The objects pace aircraft, mirror turns, retreat when threatened, return when the threat leaves. They hover over nuclear sites, follow police cars for 86 miles, fly formation with 747s, and then vanish the moment a second observer arrives. They seem to watch us watching them. Across decades, continents, and circumstances, these cases share remarkable similarities, not because witnesses copied one another, but because something real has been interacting with us in the same careful, consistent way for as long as we have had the instruments and courage to look. The differences, shape, size, color, feel almost unimportant beside the deeper pattern, controlled technology, selective electromagnetic influence, and behavior that feels less like random phenomena and more like deliberate presence. These are not isolated anomalies. They are threads in a tapestry we have only begun to perceive, woven with patience and precision across the night skies of the 20th century, and, if current reports are any guide, continuing quietly into our own. It is easy to dismiss a single excited civilian pointing at the sky. It becomes far harder when the witnesses are the people we trust to keep that sky safe. Consider the resumes. Captain Thomas Mantell, decorated combat veteran, 2,800 hours. Captain Edward Ruppelt, World War II bombardier, intelligence officer, first head of Project Blue Book. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, 20-year Air Force officer, deputy base commander guarding nuclear weapons. Captain Kenju Tarachi, 10,000-hour JL veteran, former military instructor. Officer Lonnie Zamora, respected small-town policeman with no history of fanciful reports. These are not fringe personalities. They are the same individuals we rely on to land 400-ton airliners in zero visibility, guard nations from aerial attack, and protect communities at 3 a.m. Their training emphasizes precise observation, calm judgment, and accurate reporting, exactly the qualities that make their statements difficult to ignore. Multiple witness corroboration appears in every major case. 5 police officers chased the same object across 2 states. 3 separate radar facilities tracked the RB-47's companion. 4 cruise and ground radars simultaneously watched the Tehran object. When independent observers, often strangers to one another, describe identical details without consultation, coincidence strains credulity. The physical and instrumental evidence is equally stubborn. Burned and depressed soil in Socorro. Radiation spikes and broken branches in Rendlesham. Stalled engines that restart instantly in Levelland. 36 feet of magnetic tape from the RB-47 filled with unexplained microwave signals. FAA and military radar tapes from Alaska showing a primary target the size of an aircraft carrier pacing a 747. These are not anecdotes. They are data preserved in government archives. Institutional investigations, for all their caution, repeatedly failed to produce satisfactory conventional explanations. Project Blue Book labeled many of these cases unidentified despite intense pressure to close them. The Condon Committee, the DIA, the UK Ministry of Defence, and NASA's own 2023 UAP study all revisited these incidents and found the official explanations wanting. When the institutions tasked with debunking cannot do so convincingly, skepticism itself begins to require more effort than acceptance. Serious researchers, Hynek, MacDonald, Vallée, Sturrock, Haynes, approach the problem the way scientists approach any anomaly. Collect the best cases, strip away the noise, and examine what remains. They did not begin as believers. Most began as skeptics. Yet after decades of examining pilot reports, radar tapes, landing traces, and electromagnetic effects, they converged on the same reluctant conclusion. A small but irreducible core of cases defies conventional explanation and deserves continued, rigorous study. When trained pilots, radar operators, and military officers all report the same phenomena, supported by instruments, photographs, and physical traces, dismissal becomes more difficult than acceptance. The data do not demand belief in extraterrestrial visitation. They demand only that we stop pretending the phenomenon does not exist. The most rational position may be the simplest. Something real, something advanced, and something that is chosen, repeatedly and selectively, to reveal itself to the very people whose professional lives revolve around knowing what belongs in our skies. These cases are not perfect, but they are far better than most scientific data sets we accept without question. In any other field, astronomy, medicine, physics, we would already be building new instruments to study the anomaly instead of debating whether it deserves study at all. Project Blue Book's final report in 1969 claimed that 94% of 12,618 cases had been explained as balloons, aircraft, meteors, hoaxes, or mirages. Yet when we look closely at the strongest cases, the explanations often feel more like administrative necessities than scientific conclusions. Temperature inversions were blamed for the 1952 Washington D.C. flap. Even though the inversion that night was mild and the objects performed 7,000 miles per hour turns on radar. A secret Skyhook balloon was named for Captain Mantell's death, yet no launch record matched the date or location, and balloons do not accelerate when pursued. Ball lightning, rare, tiny, and seconds long, was offered for Levelland's 9 stalled vehicles spread over 7 miles. Venus and satellites explain the Portage County Police chase that covered 86 miles and 5 eyewitnesses in separate cars. In each instance, the explanation required ignoring key data, radar tracks, multiple trained observers, physical traces, or simple timing. Why the disconnect? Cold War secrecy played a large role. In 1948 to 1952, the U.S. was racing to understand Soviet capabilities. Any unexplained aerial phenomenon risked being mistaken for a breakthrough enemy weapon. Admitting ignorance was politically dangerous. The 1953 Robertson Panel, convened by the CIA, explicitly recommended reducing public interest in UFOs to prevent clogging of defense channels. From that point forward, Project Blue Book's mission quietly shifted from investigation to public reassurance. Individual investigators faced pressure, too many reports and too little time. Captain Ruppelt, the project's most open-minded director, had a staff of 4 to handle thousands of cases yearly. When he left in 1953, the quality of investigations dropped sharply. Later officers were often chosen for their skepticism, not their curiosity. Files were closed quickly to keep the unidentified percentage low, an internal metric that mattered more than truth. Some explanations were simply honest mistakes. Swamp gas really does glow. High-altitude balloons really do look strange. but applying the same prosaic label to cases with radar, physical evidence, and dozens of trained witnesses stretched credibility past breaking. As astronomer J. Allen Hynek observed, "It is better to explain a case poorly than not to explain it at all," became an unspoken rule. Fairness requires acknowledging that many investigators worked in good faith with limited tools and intense institutional pressure. They did not have modern computers, satellite tracking, or decades of additional cases for comparison. Yet the pattern remains. The stronger the evidence, the weaker the explanation tended to be. The gaps between what witnesses reported and what investigators concluded reveal as much about human institutions as about the phenomena itself. When national security, public calm, and personal reputation are at stake, the easiest path is often to choose the familiar answer and close the file, even when the evidence quietly refuses to cooperate. Those unclosed files sit in the National Archives today, waiting for anyone willing to read them without the burden of 1950s politics or 1960s deadlines. And they still whisper the same patient question: what if the simplest explanation is not always the correct one? In 1966, after a wave of sightings in Michigan that were publicly dismissed as swamp gas, Congress demanded answers. The Air Force, weary of the topic, commissioned the University of Colorado to conduct an independent scientific study under physicist Dr. Edward U. Condon. The 2-year, $500,000 project, known as the Condon Report, was meant to be the final word. When it was released in January 1969, the 1,485-page document concluded that UFOs posed no threat to national security, offered nothing new to science, and that further study cannot be justified on the grounds of scientific advancement. The Air Force seized the verdict and, on December 17, 1969, quietly closed Project Blue Book forever. The announcement was understated. A short press release stating that 12,618 cases had been investigated, 701 remained unidentified, and no evidence of extraterrestrial vehicles or danger to the United States had been found. The office at Wright-Patterson was shuttered, the staff reassigned, and the famous sign on the door came down. The files, hundreds of thousands of pages, photographs, radar tapes, and witness statements, were microfilmed, boxed, and shipped to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, then later transferred to the National Archives in Washington. They were declassified in 1975 and have been open to the public ever since, though the sheer volume keeps most of them gathering dust. Officially, the reasons for closure were simple: no threat, no scientific value, and the matter had become a distraction from real defense priorities. Privately, many officers were relieved. The project had become a public relations burden, ridiculed in the press and late-night television. Yet the Condon Report itself was more nuanced than its summary suggested. Buried inside were chapters acknowledging that a small percentage of cases, including many we have explored, resisted explanation and deserved continued attention. Dr. Condon's own scientific coordinator, Dr. Robert Lowe, later admitted the study's negative conclusion had been decided before the research began. The legacy of Project Blue Book is therefore bittersweet. It collected the largest single archive of UFO reports in history, preserved testimony from thousands of credible witnesses, and inadvertently spotlighted the very cases that refused to be explained. Its closure did not end sightings. It simply moved the conversation underground and, eventually, into congressional hearings and Pentagon task forces half a century later. Project Blue Book may have ended, but the questions it raised never went away. The 701 unidentifieds became seeds for every serious researcher who followed. The pilots, police officers, and radar operators who spoke up in the 1950s and 60s passed their stories to new generations of military witnesses testifying before Congress in 2022 and 2023. The files are closed, the office lights turned off, but somewhere in the night skies around the world, the same patient lights continue to appear, quiet reminders that a chapter ending in 1969 was never really the end of the story. The pilots and military personnel today are reporting the same impossible maneuvers that Project Blue Book investigators couldn't explain 70 years ago. Silent lights pacing jets, objects accelerating to hypersonic speeds without sonic booms, radar tracks that vanish and reappear at will. It's as if the skies have been replaying a quiet script, one that now, in the age of smartphones and declassified videos, demands a fresh audience. Consider the 2024 disclosures from the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, ARO. In March, ARO released its first volume of the Historical Record Report, a 63-page analysis of U.S. government investigations since 1945. It found no evidence of extraterrestrial technology but acknowledged that hundreds of cases, including many from Project Blue Book, remain unresolved due to insufficient data. Echoing the old files, ARO noted patterns of electromagnetic interference and high-speed, non-ballistic motion, hallmarks of cases like the RB-47 or Tehran. By November 2024, ARO's annual report covered 757 new UAP incidents from May 2023 to June 2024, plus 272 backdated ones, bringing the total caseload to over 1,652. Of these, 118 were resolved as prosaic, 70% balloons, 16% drones, but 21 were labeled truly anomalous, unexplained even after rigorous review. These included objects demonstrating transmedium travel, air-to-water, and clustering behaviors reminiscent of the Lubbock Lights or Washington Flap. ARO's new Gremlin sensor system, tested successfully in March 2024, is now deploying for 90-day pattern of life, monitoring its sensitive sites, much like Blue Book's radar hunts in the 1950s. Congress, too, has reignited the flame. The November 13, 2024, Joint House hearing, Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, Exposing the Truth, featured whistleblowers like journalist Michael Schellenberger and former ADIP director Luis Elizondo, who alleged secret programs withholding data from oversight. Witnesses called for subpoena power against non-cooperative agencies, echoing frustrations from Ruppelt's era. A September 9, 2025, House Oversight hearing delved deeper into transparency, with veterans testifying about UAP over military installations, paralleling Mantell's fatal chase or Rendlesham's nuclear site lights. The UAP Disclosure Act of 2024, embedded in the NDA, mandates declassification of records and a centralized National Archives collection, building on Blue Book's archived files. By mid-2025, ARO aimed for full operational capability, with plans for secure civilian reporting portals, addressing the stigma that silenced witnesses like Tarachi or Spoor. These modern threads weave directly into the past. Navy pilots off California in 2004 described tic-tac, objects with no visible propulsion, mirroring Gorman's 1948 dogfight. Cubes and spheres from 2015 FLIR videos evoke the Childs-Whitted torpedo. Electromagnetic glitches persist, Navy jets losing instrumentation near UAP, just as in Tehran or Levelland. And the intelligence? Objects retreating from pursuit, then returning, behaviors halt captured on tape in 1980, now echoed in ARO's anomalous clusters. From Blue Book's 701 unidentifieds to ARO's 21 true anomalies, the continuum is unbroken. What began as hushed Pentagon memos in 1947 has evolved into congressional mandates and public briefings. The renewed interest isn't nostalgia, it's necessity. In an era of hypersonic missiles and drone swarms, unexplained aerial incursions demand answers, not for sci-fi thrills, but for flight safety and national security. For today's viewers, this matters because the sky isn't just history, it's now. Whether you're a pilot scanning your scopes or a civilian glancing upward on a clear night, these cases remind us the phenomenon hasn't changed, but our willingness to listen has. As ARO's John Kozlowski told senators in November 2024, we're pushing the bounds of detectability. The lights that puzzled Ruppel now challenge us to look closer, not with fear, but with the same quiet curiosity that drew those first witnesses into the unknown. The story isn't over. It's just getting clearer. Perhaps the most important lesson from Project Blue Book is that we don't have all the answers, and that's okay. For 22 years, the U.S. Air Force collected stories of lights that outran jets, objects that landed and left traces, craft that silenced engines and radar alike. In the end, 701 cases stayed stubbornly refused explanation. Those files now sit quietly in archives, yet they still breathe. They remind us that reality is larger than our current maps. What are we actually looking at? Some hypotheses feel almost comfortable. Secret human technology tested in plain sight, atmospheric plasmas we haven't fully cataloged, misperceptions magnified by stress or expectation. Others stretch the mind further. Visitors from distant stars, travelers from parallel realities, or even a consciousness native to Earth we have only begun to notice. None of these ideas can be proven with the data we have. None can be completely ruled out either. The phenomenon seems to delight in staying just beyond the reach of certainty, revealing itself in glimpses, then stepping back into silence. That refusal to be pinned down is, strangely, one of its most consistent traits. It appears to pilots, policemen, farmers, children, always briefly, always selectively, always when least expected. It leaves radar tapes and scorched grass, then vanishes. It responds to pursuit by retreating, to curiosity by lingering a moment longer. It behaves less like a physical object obeying strict laws and more like something aware it is being watched. In that sense, these cases do more than challenge physics. They challenge certainty itself. They invite humility. The same sky that carried by every witness, from Captain Mantell climbing toward the unknown to Lieutenant Colonel Halt whispering into his tape recorder in a dark forest, returns to us now. We are small. The universe is vast, and occasionally something vast looks back. There is deep comfort in that uncertainty. It means the story is not finished. It means there is still room for wonder in a world that sometimes feels fully explained. The lights that drifted over Washington in 1952, that hovered above Tehran in 1976, that paced to 747 over Alaska in 1986, they are still up there, patient, waiting for the next clear night and the next open mind. So keep looking up, not out of fear, not out of a need for final answers, but because the night sky has been telling us, gently and persistently, that we are part of something far larger than we yet understand. And maybe, just maybe, that is the real gift these cases have given us. Permission to stay curious, to stay humble, and to keep watching the stars with the same quiet wonder we felt as children. The mystery continues. And for now, that is more than enough. As the last echoes of these 10 stories fade into the quiet night, take a slow breath and let the stillness settle around you. Thank you for walking this long, gentle path with me. From the frozen deserts of New Mexico to the dark forests of Suffolk, from the crowded skies over Washington to the endless white silence above Alaska. You've listened to pilots, policemen, generals, and ordinary citizens tell the same calm, impossible tale. I hope you feel the same peaceful wonder I do when I first read those yellowing files. This is just the beginning. There are hundreds more cases waiting to be explored, each with its own midnight glow and unanswered question. In the episodes ahead, we'll drift through the lonely highways of the 1960s Midwest with patrolmen who chased glowing orbs for hours. We'll sit in the cockpits of Navy Super Hornets off both coasts as Tic Tac's dance rings around the world's most advanced fighters. We'll walk the lonely beaches of Brazil in 1977 when entire towns watched lights rise from the sea. We'll return to Rendlesham with new witnesses who have only recently spoken, and to the Belgian Triangle wave that brought an entire air force scrambling in 1990. And yes, we'll open the still classified folders that even ARO is only now beginning to touch. Each story will arrive the same way this one did. Softly, slowly, perfectly suited for late nights when the day has let go of. No shouting, no jump scares, just the steady rhythm of a voice inviting you deeper into the mystery while your thoughts drift towards sleep. If these 10 cases have left you curious, if you found yourself glancing upward on clear evenings, then please come back. Subscribe, ring the bell, leave a quiet thoughts in the comments. Your favorite case, the moment that made you pause, the night you saw something you still can't name. Every share, every comment helps these stories reach someone else who needs them tonight. We'll keep the lights low, the pace gentle, and the wonder wide open. The sky has been patient with us for a very long time. The least we can do is return the courtesy. So adjust your pillow, let the room grow dark, and know that the next journey is already waiting whenever you're ready. Until then, sleep well, dream softly, and keep one small corner of your mind open to the stars. They've been watching us for a long, long time. Good night. Now the room is quiet. The stories have settled like soft snow on still water. Outside your window, the same sky that puzzled pilots and policemen stretches wide and patient. It has watched humanity for thousands of nights and never hurried to explain itself. Tonight it simply shines, steady, gentle, immense. Let your thoughts drift there for a moment. Feel the cool hush of deep space, the slow turning of ancient stars, the faint whisper of something moving just beyond the edge of sight. Whatever these lights are, they have never wished us harm. They appear, linger, and leave us changed, quieter, wider-eyed, a little more in love with the dark. There is no need to solve the mystery tonight. Some questions are meant to travel with us, soft companions on the journey to sleep. So close your eyes. Let the wonder stay, light as a feather on your chest. Let the night hold you the way it has held every witness we've met. Gently, completely, without demand. The stars above hold secrets we're only beginning to understand. Rest well, and let these mysteries accompany your dreams. Good night.